let's get started. Welcome everyone to the January 26th, 2023 episode of the Riverside School Board meeting.
It's maybe just for turns.
And with that, could I have a motion to establish the agenda as published?
So moved.
And a second,
Seconded.
all in favor? Aye. Against? Okay, with that, we've got our agenda and we'll move on to superintendent's report.
We have plenty of reports coming, so no reports. I have a couple announcements later, but no major reports.
And then recognition.
Yes, unfortunately, Chantal Johnson, our head coach of our girls swim and dive team, is ill, and so we're going to postpone the swim and dive until the next meeting for their recognition as state champions. So with that, I do, because our next meeting kind of falls at the tail end, February 6th through the 10th is National School Counseling Week. And it's an important opportunity for us just to think about the impact that our counselors have on our students, both the academic counselors at our middle school and our high school, but also our youth and family services partners. And so we'll be sending them out certificates and some things, and certainly thanking them for all their efforts. But that's coming up here in early February. And then tomorrow is International Holocaust Remembrance Day. We also have another Remembrance Day that comes up in April that is more a national recognition that corresponds with some other recognition. So we'll be sending out just a small tweet and social media on that tomorrow. And then May is Jewish Heritage Month. And so we'll be joining our Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month and that in celebration in May. So those are the recognitions.
Great, thank you very much. There is no public input today, so we will skip it. As always, my call for public input or email to the board is most appreciated. And the board reads it all, so please feel free to do either. And let's move on to partial governance monitoring. Do we want to move up at coaches, or
Sure.
if we want, we can?
Do you want to move up coaches or move to fundamental 2 and then coaches, and we can push 1440 or 4040 down in the agenda? Or do you want to go with coaches first?
Coaches first, okay, since if everyone's here.
Yeah.
Yeah, we should honor them first. Great.
So coming up to our, to join us today are our elementary coaching cadre. You have a chance to hear from and meet with our middle school and high school group. And so we're going to bring in our elementary team. I believe we have one person who's joining us via Zoom. Is that Angela?
I don't know that she'll be able to join. She's in class.
Fair enough. Doing some important learning.
Yeah.
That's probably a good thing.
If she's on, Andrea, you can promote her, but I don't think she is.
So it's a privilege and an honor, and having spent time in the elementary world in our district, certainly before coming to the district office, you know, this is a team that I've worked shoulder to shoulder with at Lake Ridge, 2 of them in particular, but all 4 of them worked with on a number of projects over the years. So I'll turn it over to Nova Director Williams to introduce the team and give us our presentation on our elementary coaches.
Let me get it started and share my screen real quick, and then we are going to do introductions as a part of our presentation. You'll see those. Host disabled participant sharing. Okay, so we'll do introductions as a part of our sharing tonight, but I'll run you this evening. This is a continuation from last week, but this time we wanted to have the elementary coaches in front of you so that they could explain a little bit of their work. As a reminder, we have 5 coaches at the elementary level. We have 4 site-based coaches, and then we have 1 district-based coach in Chris. So our intent tonight is really to add on to last week's presentation. So we'll give you a look at what our elementary coaches are doing. And then we'll share that kind of surrounding their roles. And connected to that, we'll talk a little bit about the tentacles of their work beyond just the coaching work that they're doing. And we'll give you a little bit of information about how coaches are accessed, what kind of work they do in our elementary schools, which might look a little different presently, certainly than our middle school and high school. All right, so we'll do introductions first. So I'm Nova. I oversee our coaches as a team and work closely with them. And I'll let them introduce themselves. Joby, do you want to introduce yourself first?
Sure, I'm Joby, I am at
Lisa Beanstalk, I'm the instructional coach at Lake Ridge Elementary School.
I'll go next.
I'm Heidi Clark and I'm the instructional coach at Northwood.
And I'm Chris Coughlin-Ray, that one all the way over to the right. I'm the inclusion coach for all of this.
And then Angela Mitchell is our site-based coach at West Mercer, and she is not here with us this evening, so we'll be representing her content this evening. So we included here just some fun pictures because as they are, humans outside of their role, and I thoroughly enjoy working with all of them as human elements of our system. They're a great team to work alongside. And then I wanted them to add their teaching experience because I think it's important for us to see the breadth of experience that we have in that number of years for our staff members as coaches having access to those staff members. So let's talk about access. So we want to think about what percentage of teachers access coaches in each of these buildings in any way, shape, or form. So I asked them to go through the staff list. I did not look at that information because part of this work is that the work that they engage in with teachers is not my purview. So I don't see what they do with a teacher. I see the product of what they do with teachers. So I asked them to look at their list of teachers in their buildings as a staff and identify what percentage this year they've worked with in some capacity. So we're going to show you those numbers so that you can see them. These are the numbers that we have in the first 4-ish months of school as we've gone through. So Island Park, Joby's first year as a coach. Joby has the 95.6%. It's very precise. Northwood is Heidi down here at 96%, and Lake Ridge at West Mercer, we have 100%. So pretty high numbers in terms of how they're accessing coaches for support in any variety of ways. And we'll talk a little bit about what that looks like because there's a lot, I think, in terms of what ways people might access coaches to help seek that support. So that's our support menu. So I'll show you this. It may be hard to see all of these things, but we're going to speak to some of them. So there are lots of ways in which someone accesses a coach. I think last week or 2 weeks ago, I guess now, you heard more about sort of the coaching cycle and what that looks like as they support coaches or go through a coaching cycle to support a teacher. But beyond that, there are lots of ways that coaches are accessed. Before I forget it, I can even say it today in thinking about our letters training, is that at the tail end of that, one of the things people are given is the idea that they can go back to their coach to get some additional job embedded professional learning around that. So we'll touch on that in a bit here. One of the things that I think in general is data. So I'll speak to that piece and then each of our coaches will run through a piece of it as well. So when we think about data review, there's certainly a lot of data that we have access to in our school systems. But if we don't have the knowledge of how to use it, then it's useless. So our coaches have been supporting that process and identifying what does this mean? And then now what do I do instructionally with it, which is really where their power is. I can tell them all the things about what it means that I want to, but I can't be in their classrooms every day to help support them with that instructional piece. So that is where the power comes in each of these folks so that they can help support that. So I'll let them run through their bits about the menu and what part of it. We're not going to cover all of them, but each of them will cover one element from the menu here. You first.
Sure. So one thing that I'll briefly cover from the menu, and this is just, again, a small sampling that we provide teachers at the beginning of the year. All of our coaching menus look slightly different, but this was one that was shared with the West Mercer staff. One of the things that we offer our teachers is to go on learning walks. And a learning walk is an opportunity for a teacher to go and see their colleagues within their building or sometimes within other buildings and observe them. And last year I had a chance of supporting several different teachers and doing learning walks around Northwood. Teaching can feel really isolated, and especially coming out of COVID, when teachers were in their homes, in front of computers. Some teachers might have done their student teaching remote and not had a chance to even engage in their student teaching with students face to face. So a learning walk has been a great tool for us to utilize across buildings. The way that we kind of structured it is the teacher will identify an area or a goal that they would like to work on. And then we use that as a lens as we go into different classrooms. And as a coach, we are able to be a reflective partner. Once we step outside of that classroom, we can discuss things that they saw, moves that the teacher made. They can reflect on some noticings or wonderings that they have. And it's an opportunity for us to kind of sharpen our focus when they go back into their own classroom. It's also a chance for us to celebrate all of the great things that we see these teachers and these practices, growing in our buildings, and a chance, again, to build those connections. So if it's a newer teacher, who's maybe a primary teacher getting a chance to push up and see a more experienced or an intermediate teacher, we're creating connections and giving teachers a chance to learn from one another and celebrate, all that we see that is going so well in our buildings. Yeah, go ahead.
My turn. Yes. So I'm the inclusion coach, which means my job is just a little bit different. And it really does die into the UDL, which is the Universal Design for Learning. And that for me has meant that one of my primary jobs over the last year and a half has been to provide and make sure that teachers have the resources to actually complete that Universal Design for Learning. So one of the things that has happened is there's now a website that they can go to and access all the resources that support, including what is a filmed learning walk. There are examples, exemplars, there's printed resources so they can do a needs asset of their class. And my function is to come into a classroom if a teacher is having trouble figuring out, how do I reach down and up? And for me, the up part is really important because we can't forget those kids who need that extra challenge. So oftentimes I come into a class and I might run a small group for a teacher for a while so that they can see what happens in an extended group. I might run another group so that they can try out that extended piece. I also provide them the resources when they need it. So for instance, I'm working with my initial was 3 through 5, but I've ended up going into the high school and I'm ending up going now down into 2nd grade and 1st grade because we just used iReady to identify those kids who need extension in 2nd grade. So my mandate at this point is to make sure those kids do not miss that extension. And a big part of that is me helping the teacher understand that they can do all that and also providing the resources to get it there. So there's several of those different kinds of resources. I don't know if you want me, there's a lot of resources I can talk
We'll
about.
talk about some of
It's
these.
been a busy couple of years,
Yeah.
but and they're on the end here in the last slide. Yeah, just some of them.
So one of the things Chris referenced that I just want to make sure we're clear on too is we have some teachers that are piloting the use of iReady assessment at the primary level, K1 and 2. Obviously, they'll use it when we roll out for the next series for the adoption, but we had some teachers who were really ready and wanted to look at that math data for their kids because as a criterion referenced assessment, it provides something different than the norm referenced assessment that AimsWeb is. So our teachers in K1 and 2, a grouping of them chose to come to an optional training that principals hosted so that they could get that information and start using it. And we'll also do a pilot of some of the literacy items to see if that's something we're interested in. Lisa.
One of the instructional coaching options that you could find at any one of our schools is a classroom visit. So you can invite an instructional coach into your classroom where they can do some observations for you, whatever you'd like us to observe. It could be time on task for a specific student. It could be data collection around transition times, whatever it is a teacher might be looking to see current realities. And so we are that extra eyes in your classroom. It's by invitation only, but we get invited all the time as you're working through whatever issue you're trying to develop or get better at in your classroom, whatever that strategy might be. And another thing that I really find that coaches are a space where it is a safe space for listening and support. As one of our values is a safe and comforting community, the teachers need that space as well. And I believe that coaches provide that opportunity, a non-evaluative space where you can come and talk about whatever you need to talk about work-related, and we're there for you and to support in any way that you need. And having it be one of our values, I do believe that instructional coaches at the elementary school level, our doors are open, and that's why you see those percentages are so high at all of our schools. We all have incredible relationships with our staff, and it really is a place where you can get the support that you need without feeling judged. And I think that in any work environment, it's important to have that space.
Well, when a teacher decides that they want to have somebody come in and model some lessons, there are a couple of prongs that we use when we decide, or they decide how they're going to invite you in. And one of them might be because they want some professional growth in a specific area. And it could also be based on the curriculum implementation. And we have 2 of those going on right now, and they want some support to be able to manage that better. Or it could be model some classroom management or transition behaviors and things like that. And so that's no problem. Another tier that we use is our student support team, and we are all in charge of the student support team at each of our sites. And when we looked at the data of the number of referrals we received just in the first few months of school, it was noteworthy to us, the number of students that are being referred simply for behavioral, social, emotional, and executive functioning types of issues. And so I can give you the sample of the data that we collected. At West Mercer, 41% of them have been related to that. Northwood has 73% of the referrals. Lake Ridge came in with 65%, of Allen Park with 80%. And so another way we can model some lessons, or we look at the data and what it tells us and what do students need. So it's not just what staff needs, but what can students benefit from. And so the example at our school for how this has been addressed is I had the opportunity to put together 8 social emotional learning lessons and 10 executive functioning lessons. And the executive functioning are for kindergarten through 2nd, 3rd through 5th are social emotional, and offered them to the staff. They could sign up for as few or as many as they wanted. And 15 of the 17 classroom teachers signed up for them for a total of 118 lessons in January and February. So we're kind of in the middle of that right now. So it's actually modeling the strategies for students to actually how to use them and benefit them. We've heard the board talk quite a bit about social, emotional, executive functioning, that's really a great need as we come out of the pandemic, or we hope to be coming out of it. And so that's an opportunity to help all kids, so touching every child in the school, but it also provides an opportunity for the teaching staff to either co-teach with you, and some have elected to do that, and others have used the time to simply watch you teach and interact with the same group of students that they have. And that's beneficial because the responsibility is different. It's on somebody else, and they can actually watch how kids are interacting, socializing, and actually managing the skills and strategies that they're being taught. And that's it. I think that's where we are.
Can I ask a quick question on
Sure.
that? Do you or the classroom teacher communicate with the parents, especially when it's executive functioning, things that they could be supporting at home?
Sure, that's a great question. And classroom teachers have the decision making in that role. They can share it out, and some have. There is a classroom that has asked if I would create the material or share the material with their parents or specific parents of students that have been targeted to receive services in what we call our PALS program, students who have high dysregulation frequency and need some support, and they might be working one-on-one with somebody. And so I have direct contact with some parents that teachers have asked if I would do that. But it really is up to the classroom teacher. We're at their disposal, and whatever it is that we can do to help them meet the needs of those kids. If it includes communicating with parents, we're happy to draft emails or to actually send it for them to be on. So it's varied depending on what the teacher wants.
Thank you.
Sure.
The instructions you give to teachers to be able to detect and help students with their executive functioning. How big is that lesson, and is it recorded? Could it be viewed offline?
Sure.
How do you guys treat that?
Sure. So how it's handled at our school is I'm the one that comes in and teaches the lessons. And So they consist of typically a short video that gives kind of an overview or warm them up on, hey, this is what it's gonna look like, and this is the skill that we're talking about, or the executive functioning area. And then there's typically a game and or an activity of some kind, so they actually have to practice the skills that we're telling them. So for example, today, there was metacognition was one of the focus in first grade. And so we practiced metacognition games where they had to remember some things that they're going to need to use immediately, because that's what metacognition is. So they aren't recorded, it's just replicated in every classroom of every teacher who signed up. And they're all at different times because people selected them to be. So, you know, it's typically 4 to 8 lessons a day in different classrooms based on what the teachers have signed up for. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I have 3 questions. So one's related to the last one that David asked. So when it comes to tracking social, emotional, executive functioning skills, do we track how many of those students were in separate classes that are now are in heterogeneous classes? The second question is, it was mentioned for iReady. Is there a designated point person when it comes to sort of deciphering functionality and the capabilities when it comes to these platforms, or is that a technology instructional coach? And then the third is in the intro slide, it showed the number of teaching years experience, a number of experiences as an instructional coach. And it looks like for the instructional coaches, it's relatively short. I think it goes back to 2019. Whereas like teaching went back to like 96. How should we think about that? I guess one of the questions, you know, why is that the case? You know, that's relatively short tenures so far as instructional coaches. Can we expect that going forward? Is that going to change? But those are the 3 different topics or questions that I have.
I'll start with the answer to their coaching question. And the biggest reason for that is we haven't had site-based coaches for that long. So we had coaches years ago that were literacy-based. They were cut and that was changed. So we didn't have coaches for a while. They were re-implemented as Donna came in. And so we had site-based coaches. Initially, we had 2 that expanded to 4, and then we added a 5th that changed roles. So Chris's role has been an evolution of a variety of different roles. But we have, Joby came on just recently as one of our coaches left. And so we've had that.
So part of it is people rotating off, part of it is expanding the instructional
Yep,
coaching program.
exactly.
And if I can just add on to that, just quickly from the secondary perspective, Jamie and I were reflecting a little bit about our coaching model there. Our middle school team has been, you know, Emily Mills, who you met. She's been there for quite a bit of time. We added Maria Fontana into that. But for the first time, since really the coaching began at the high school, we have 2 coaches who they don't have the classroom responsibility, and they're together again this year. I think we kind of mentioned that at the last meeting, but I can't impress upon us all how important that continuity is. Nova and I were in a meeting the other day and remembering that we've been together for nearly a decade working on the dyslexia work, and that's when we came to the district office together. I was a director and she was an admin intern, but that continuity over time is really important. And I think we're building that more and more and trying to sustain and not think about it as a rotating position. Certainly people want to rotate in and out, but we need to build some consistency. And I think we're doing that.
And Heidi will talk about this here in a bit, but part of what we do for sustainability purposes, sorry, different Heidi, I know I get you every time. Is that, you know, some of these folks, actually a good majority are also letters facilitators. So in thinking about sustainability for the district, it can't always be, you know, Amy Batliner Gillette was one of our letters facilitators in a prior year. She is no longer with the district. I am a letters facilitator. But in thinking about keeping that sustainability, we want teachers and coaches to really be the owners of that work, so that they can go off to classrooms and support teachers with that continuation of work, which is job embedded PD, which is going to have the highest rate of success. And so that we have sustainability as a district. So when someone leaves, we don't lose traction in that process. And that was part of the plan that we built when we initiated this whole process, was that there was a sustainability plan embedded in that. And we have ongoing conversations about adding more folks to our group as well, our cadre.
And Heidi and I both were the original coaches at our site base and have been there since the position opened. So,
We're the grandmas of the team.
yeah. It's coordinated.
I was gonna add that I don't think that, I think that the wealth of experience gives them credibility, gives me credibility when I go into a classroom. You just have to have it. If you don't have that whole pedagogy experience in back of you, you just cannot sit there and know what to do next. Yeah, no traction, but also no internal traction. What do I do next? What do I do? And we frequently are together saying, okay, what do we do here? I've got a problem of practice. I really don't know where to go next on this one because I'm not a primary teacher, but Joby's got tons of years in primary. So I think we use each other a lot for that kind of thing, which I think begs that whole, why is there so many years there and not so many in the coaching? I think that's a great question.
So then I'll address your other questions. I think with the second question, I'm not entirely sure what you're thinking about in terms of.
Yeah, so like, I mean, this is the data question about like using iReady. I mean, so for instance, I just got a new Phoenix Pro 6 for the holidays. And there's a ton of functionality in data, which is super useful for activities, but like, there's a lot of customization, a lot of navigating around screens, and the tool is only useful insofar as one knows how to use it. And so when we're thinking about powerful tools that the district has invested significantly in, and that it has great promise and potential, at least theoretically, how is that then, do we think of that in terms of instructional coaches, less the pedagogy and more like how to use tools
Yeah.
in the classroom?
Yeah, so I would say both of those things. So as an ongoing connection, I connect with all of these individuals. So I get information from them about what is or isn't working, and then what we need support with. And then beyond that, coaches go to the classrooms because they're the people that are in the field. So I'm gonna kind of go into this next slide here. Actually, this is a good segue for us. In thinking about those two adoptions, we have Benchmark Advance and iReady Classroom. Both of those things are a heavy lift, not something that we can do in isolation. So when we think about our coaching team, these folks are the ones who go into classrooms to help model lessons or to help work through a lesson to figure out what the next step is, to look at the new data that they have that they've never looked at before, to figure out the usability of the tool in general. How do I access this? What is this extra tool that we've never had before? So they go into those classrooms and they're the ones that are predominantly supporting the teachers, the classroom teachers throughout that. And then of course we have the spot PDs throughout the year that help support that through iReady and our partners in iReady.
And is there any formal process? My understanding there's some customization that's available for iReady. I mean, is there a point person within the instructional coach team that is the liaison to iReady, or how does
Yeah.
that work?
So I'm the liaison to iReady, but the coaches and the principals meet with them regularly as well. So I'm the one who meets most frequently, then they meet with them as well as the principals. And then we've also divvied up the coaches such that we have half of them functioning as literacy support and then half of them functioning as math. And then again, that collaboration that they do, because obviously in their buildings, they're not adopting one tool, they're adopting both tools. So they collaborate with one another so that they can better support the teachers in their classrooms. So yes, and yes, and yes.
And if you want a couple of examples of how we're actually using that, when we planned our school improvement plan this year, one of the focus was on math, and we used the iReady data, the benchmark assessment to determine, or the diagnostic, to determine which domain had the most room for improvement or growth at a grade level. So each grade level looked at that data, looked at the domain and identified which one needs the most support. And then each grade level set a student improvement goal based on the data from their grade level. And then, so another example is a second grade teacher and I worked yesterday. She took the data from her class and I wanted to involve her students in setting the goals. So we looked at where students lie, and now we prepared a presentation that we will give to them in the coming days that will show them actually look at the data and say, you know, this is where you've scored, this is how you're doing. This would be a realistic goal for you to make. They're going to set their own goals and then monitor that over time. So it is being used, and I think it will become easier for all of us as we learn more about it too. We're learning it at the same time as them, but we're the ones that are in the classroom actually helping teachers to segregate the data and figure out what they want to do next, as well as contacting the iReady folks. And they come and provide support for us as well. So we're learning alongside with them, but that's where we are at this
Daily,
point.
I have conversations with teachers around the reports that they want to run. I know where to find those reports. I can find a report for whatever you're looking for. But one of the new reports we are just looking at was a Common Core standard report where I can pull one student's report and it will tell me all the standards they've mastered and which goals they have. So I will get a student, we just ran the data report and he was missing place value. It was like the one Common Core standard he didn't have, and he had everything else in that whole grade one, but just the one, you know, so we know where to target that instruction now, where we really have never had such like refined data to see where the holes are. We both constantly talk about this holes in math. We weren't sure where they are, and the diagnostic will tell us exactly which skills a student has and which ones they may have a gap in. And it's a quick trick, right? It's a quick one. I grabbed a group of 5 kids. We did another place value for 4th grade, and they were just like, oh, and they're older, so they get faster. So you can see wherever the holes might be, and you can just fill them quickly.
And do
Yeah.
you expect that like some of those reports will start being available to parents? I mean, I think one of the things, for the most part, at least from my perspective of this, you know, it's a little bit of a black box from a parent's perspective in terms of the data. You know, like the traditional spelling test that my daughter does with 20 like spelling words, like each week, like I get it back, I see it, like I know exactly like how she's done. I hear about the diagnostic tests that are run quite frequently on iReady, and I hear her tell me about it, but I don't get any sort of communication from the school about that.
Yeah, so a couple of clarifications. The diagnostic happens 3 times a year. So a teacher could share that. There's a 4 families report, and some of this will be talked about in the iReady Family Night that we have coming up that first week of February. So we've sent some communications out, and we'll send an email blast out to families as well to share that with them. That's virtual, so they can join from home. It will be recorded, so if a family can't attend, we'll be posting that so that they can see it later. But they'll talk a little bit about that family access, and I think our teachers are starting to now learn a bit more about those tools and those reports. On Monday, in fact, when we have our PD day, the iReady team will come and talk through the growth reports that are available, which is Fred and I started looking at it a little bit, and it's just really exciting to see some of the growth that has happened in this tool. And so on Monday, when they come, they'll start talking about that, and they'll talk about some of those reports that they can share with families. And I think in year 1, it's important for us to help give teachers the access and time and space to learn the tool. And then once they feel that confidence of using the tool, then we have the opportunity to say, okay, now it's time. We want to make sure that you're sharing this information with families. So now we can layer those expectations in. I think if we layer that in to start, it detracts a little bit from the progress that's made in instruction. I understand as a parent where you're coming from, and I totally agree. And I think we'll get there. I absolutely believe that.
So I have a question. Oh, sorry. No. Are you sure? Yes. I have a question. In a case like what Joby, what you were talking about, going in and teaching the curriculum on social emotional, you know, self-regulation, that kind of stuff. Is the idea then the next year those teachers will teach it themselves? And then if they then teach it themselves, like I'm kind of thinking like medical school where it's like see one, do one, teach one, right? Like are they then passing that information along, or like what's the follow-up kind of to that? Like if they teach it next year but they have trouble, do they then like ask for help from an instructional coach? Like what's the kind of follow-up?
Sure, that's a great question. It hasn't been defined at this point. It could be any number of those things. If coaches are still in place next year, I would imagine that I would continue to offer that and go into classrooms and do that. And with teachers who wanted to co-teach, we would do that. If coaches are not part of the elementary school next year, then teachers would have the option to do it themselves, or it would be abandoned. There isn't a plan set in place for how it would look after this. This was just based on the data that we have been gathering, based on what our students need right now at this time. This was a response to that. It may or may not be necessary to continue it next year. Again, it'll just depend on the number of referrals that come to the student support team. So great question. I hadn't thought that through. However, I don't think we have an answer for that at this point.
Yeah, I think it's still too new for that.
Yeah. It's so needed.
Yeah, it is, yeah.
Something on that front. Thank you. I will say, Joby made a great point, like it's based, like the way that we step into our work is based off of what teachers identify, what data is helping us identify and have clarity around. And whether it's Joby being the one to actually teach the lesson, or he is working with a teacher alongside a teacher, helping them understand, you know, all the ins and outs and intricacies of executive function and what that looks like for students. It can look so different depending on what it is the teacher is identifying as a need. So if this year teachers are, leaning on Joby to lead that work within the instructional realm. Like that, like they are gleaning so much understanding just from, having those conversations with their students. A teacher at my school identified one student in her class who might benefit, and as we kind of started to benefit from specific executive function skills around organization. And this was brought up in an SST meeting. And as we started to kind of peel back the layers and discuss like how we might teach organization to an intermediate students, we discovered that it's not something that just one student needs, it's something that all the students in that teacher's class would benefit from. So through our conversations and reflections, she was able to build out multiple lessons, like how to organize my desk, how to organize my backpack. And these are some things teachers need to do naturally in more primary grades, but seeing what the need is post-COVID, like we've got to get creative with how we're supporting our students.
And Heidi, sorry about the water bottle toss, but can you talk about SST?
Oh,
Just
okay.
first-
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, and I think it's kind of Heidi, what you're saying first, I want to say that I love the non-evaluative space. I think that one of the best ways to support our students is to support our teachers. And that's what I'm hearing, that instructional coaches support the teachers. So I think that is really a powerful privilege that we have at Mercer Island, and I appreciate that. So I'm kind of also hearing you say, and I think that's what some of the board are saying, a lot of the service that we do are very individualized, which is really great. But as we get more creative because of this, the need is so much higher, and because we have lesson resource, right? Then how do we think, and I think this is what some of the questions are, how do we take what we do on an individual basis to systematize, to, like, are we creating videos, are we posting up there, are we providing those kind of, this and that, right? Because like in therapy, we can no longer do one-on-one therapy all the time, right? We have to kind of address that 90% before they get, so that's how I'm hearing some of my board members talk, and then kind of the balance between individualized services and also systematizing our services. And then also, I know that we do a lot of student evaluation, like for like 360 evaluation. And I wonder, and this is kind of a question, like, do we survey our teachers of what they need now, right? To make sure that what they need aligns as a whole system, and not just those who seek help. Because those who seek help, just like therapy, is only sometimes a small percentage to seek help, but there's more other folks that need help. And so have we thought about doing, or are we currently doing a survey of teachers of how they see instructional coaches helping them in the areas of need that they?
Yeah, I am just gonna tell you, our teachers are surveyed to death with the volume of
Yeah.
surveys
I
that
was
they
gonna
receive about
say.
coaching services. So yes, the answer is that they do lots of surveys to find out what supports they need. And I'm gonna transition us actually back to this slide, because this slide speaks to your other question around that, and speaks to Superintendent Renzel's question around SST. So some of those district-wide supports that we design are surrounding the survey information that teachers give back. We also do exit slips every time we do a PD, so we get feedback from them. We ask them what they enjoyed, what they still need, what they have questionings about, what they want us to change about future PD. So we get lots of feedback from them around that, so that we can model whatever we do next more toward what their needs are in a universal way. I'm gonna kind of jump into the building-based PD. I'm not sure who is doing building. Okay, because I think that speaks to that question in terms of what we design at the building level, because even though we have 4 elementaries on the same small island, each of these elementaries, even in the data that Joby shared, is significantly different. Our demographics are different at each of those elementaries. So the needs are slightly different even within those teachers. So the PD that's building-based is designed in conjunction with principals and coaches to meet those needs. So I'll have Joby speak. to that.
Sure. So part of our responsibility in working with Nova is to recruit teachers to help present professional development. For us to also present, plan, and deliver this professional development. I'll give you a few examples of the professional development that we have put together and have begun to implement this year, and that we will continue to offer at our next session. And just as Nova described, it is based on what teachers say they need and want. And some of that is around the curriculum implementation, and some of it is around other things. So for example, when we think about the focus on our professional development this year has been on iReady and benchmark implementation and the supports that people need. What are their ongoing needs? And if they're asked constantly, what do you need? Frequently, not constantly. We've had what we call our mini professional developments, and we had one in December, and then we have another one next Wednesday, and there's the possibility of a third. I'm not sure if the date has been finalized or what will happen that day, but there are 4 different areas: the curriculum adoption. There are some offerings for staff on inclusion. So one of those is on the restorative justice component, and then another one was offered on multilingual support strategies by our English language learning staff that provided support for not just folks who are ELL teachers, but other teachers or people that may be interested in knowing how they provide for that inclusion. There's a lot of talk about rigor and the need for depth of knowledge and for challenge and rigor in our district. And so there were 2 offerings, one on depth of knowledge, and the one in December was offered for iReady, and the one next week will be depth of knowledge as it relates to literacy. And the math access points, Chris Coughlin-Ray was a part of a team, and Lisa Beanstalk creating a document for how to access math standards at various levels. So here's the standard. What do you do if a student's exceeding that standard? What do you do for those who are about at the standard? What do you do for those who are at risk of not meeting the standard? And so there's some training that folks have been given on that as well, if you elected to sign up for that one. And then we had something, when you think about the whole child and the social emotional impact that we've seen in recent years, a tier 1 strategy. So tier 1 are strategies or implementations that you would offer in the general ed classroom that are good for all students. But what do you do when students are dysregulated or they're having social emotional disturbance? What are some things that the classroom teacher might do to actually address that and help provide some support for them? So those are what our PD offerings are. So when you talk about systematizing or making it unilateral across the district, all 4 elementary schools are participating in those. So we have a balance of both. We need to meet the needs of individual teachers and what they need to grow professionally and for that specific group of students. And we're also addressing, these are the needs that teachers have said they had that we're going to offer to all 4 elementary schools. So I think, if I'm answering your question, I think we're doing both, or we're attempting to do both. If that makes sense, if I can explain it any better. Okay.
Sure. So, one of the most exciting things I feel that the instructional coaches at the elementary school level has done is participate in our student support team process. So prior to 2019, 2020, every building had a different process to support a student in need. If a student currently has an IEP, then they have a team that's ready to activate whatever they need. But if a student is not currently with a plan, then teacher needs support with the student. We have this SST, and it was kind of all over the place. Every building did it differently. Teachers were receiving stipends to run these meetings if they had time, and we as instructional coaches were building based, were able to take this as their lead. And we work closely with Erin Battersby to make sure that we were doing the documentation process appropriately. Should it lead to a BGT, which then needs to be documented in a certain way. So we worked with Andres to make sure it was systemized across all 4 buildings and that we have one central place to store all the information. So as of right now, we have a folder for all 4 buildings. The form is exactly the same. The resources we try to access are the same, so we know it's unilateral across all the buildings. And the nice part about that was we share our school psychologist, who we also work very closely with, and the student support team in any building consists of the teacher who's referring the student, the instructional coach. You'll probably invite your LSP teacher if there's a reading issue. If it's we have kids with gross motor skills, your PE teacher might show up, your previous teacher might come. We invite different people according to what the student's needs might be, and we have these meetings before school. And during that time, we brainstorm some interventions that may be currently in place. And if they're working, if you have the data to show that it is or isn't working. So that is our space, and a safe space to talk about what's happening. We'll do a pre-SST meeting to make sure a teacher can bring the data with them to say, We don't want teachers showing up at this meeting saying, I don't know, it's not working out. So you have to come with some data. So the coaches will go in ahead of time and talk with the teacher and say, what are you going to bring to this meeting so that we can have a look at the data and what's happening with this one student. With our site, we invite our school psychologists to come to these meetings, and what was so interesting to see is they're dated by the year. So we were able to hand over the 5th grade SST forms of students who are receiving whatever accommodations they've worked right up to the middle school now. And that has never, ever been. And so Uzma, who happens to be our psychologist at Lake Ridge, is also the one at IMS. And I was like, this is the folder like that you want. And it was old 5th grade and now it's at 6th grade. So she's really able to see some historical data on a student that maybe not be getting IEP online, they don't have a service, but this is like, there was a concern, or this is what works with this one teacher, because we keep that documentation pretty tight and it's all in compliance.
Yeah.
And I'll just speak to this vertical calibration. With the elementary school coaches, we work together as a team all the time. And prior to this, I've been at Lake Ridge since 2014. Occasionally we did some group work with I think we were closer with Island Park for a while because we used to do our PDs with Island Park, but there isn't a ton of grade band or talking across the different grades as we would like. There's only so many professional developments you get in a year. And the instructional coaches are able to calibrate across the 4 buildings so that it's more consistent than I think it's ever been in terms of what's being delivered in any 3rd, 4th, 5th K classroom across all 4 buildings. And it's really the instructional coaches that can speak to what are the best practices happening in your kindergarten classroom. I'm going to bring that back to my school. I'm going to offer a learning walk, what's happening at your school. So we are really the facilitators of opening up the window into all the other buildings, which I think has been great. And in collaboration with the middle school, I've taken it upon myself to really look at the middle school curriculum and how well is our 5th grade ready to transition to the middle school, whether it be for math or for reading. And the instructional coaches, I have a good relationship with Emily and Maria to say, let's bring our 5th grade teachers up to the middle school and let's do some more learning walks over there. And I really feel like the space with the instructional coaches, we're able to do that. And have the time and space.
End with Heidi on data.
Yeah.
Do you want me
So
to slip to the next one?
sure. So with regards to data analysis, there are so many different pockets of data that we can pull from as instructional coaches that otherwise a single teacher might not be able to access. So one of my favorite pieces of data that I was digging through recently was our Aimsweb data. Over the last 4 years, the district has really made a concerted effort to provide training for our kindergarten, 1st and 2nd grade teachers using the LETTERS professional development. And so LETTERS stands for Language Essentials for Teachers of Reading and Spelling. And this is really the science of reading and brain-based research and how to best instruct students, all children, but especially students who might have dyslexia or might have difficulties with learning how to read. So we have made over the last 4 years, all kindergarten, 1st, 2nd grade teachers. Last year, our 5th grade teachers were able to attend this training.
Any new staff member, our ELD teachers, our learning support teachers, our special education teachers, basically anybody who works with the K-5 child.
So prior to 2019, we have been using one tool called Aimsweb to administer to students. And I was looking at our kindergarten end of year data from 2019, and about 80% of the students were at the 40th percentile or higher. In one of the subtests that we administered, it's called phoneme segmentation.
I'm gonna just say why the 40th percentile is important. The 40th percentile, of course, with an average range is important because that's the end of your target for any grade level as your measure. So we want students to at minimum be at that 40th percentile to indicate outcomes, future outcomes to be successful for them.
So to some people that might look pretty good. However, after all of our kindergarten teachers going through the LETTERS professional development during the 2019-2020 school year. And then there was kind of this pandemic that happened, so we didn't have spring data from 2020.
Yeah.
But looking at our next data set at the end of the year, 2021, 98% of our students were at or above the 40th percentile.
Which half of our year was virtual.
So maybe
that's
like they were
important to
doing a lot of
remember.
reading.
Yes, but that will not impact phoneme segmentation.
The reason I chose this sub-skill is because this is something that some teachers might have been doing a little bit here and there some of the time, but having attended the letters training and really understanding the way that these little brains need to be wired and the discrete set of skills that students need to acquire developmentally in order to get to that point where they can start to read and blend and sound out words. This phoneme segmentation skill is really something that might have been overlooked a little bit prior to this letters professional development. So seeing these numbers was really exciting as someone who is now a trainer with the letters professional development. And also a huge pat on the back, shout out to our kindergarten, first and second grade teachers who have taken this and run with it. As instructional coaches, we are able to be in the building with them. We're able to step in, review data with them in real time. We're able to help them problem solve, help them access, resources, model things for them. So this is a great example of job embedded professional development that is having a significant impact on student learning.
I don't think you can really underestimate that, and I don't think you guys are you're not giving yourself enough credit. Many of us have high school age and beyond, where our kids at Mercer Island were not learning to read with phonics, and watching the struggle and the number of kids that were abandoning the district because it wasn't working for them, the levels of dyslexia. I can't imagine that the diagnosis rate is much different now, but the reading, this instruction is actually meeting the needs of our kids. So thank you for all that work on that, because I'm watching it make a difference. And I think we can tell, we know the places that people go, and it just, maybe I'm a little bit out of the loop because I'm not at the elementary schools anymore, but I don't think there's this big exodus like there was. I think that demonstrates it right there.
And I think that, really the teachers are the reason that this is where it is. They came into this and they were really truly invested, and they've taken the tools that we've given them and they've really run with them, as I referenced. And I think that I believe that our teachers can rival the work in any of those private school systems to support the kids in learning to read. I really believe that. Letters is IDA accredited, so I just want to point that out. That's an important feature.
We just, Nova and I just came from an all-day training with some of our teachers today, and one of the teachers had recently just finished her master's
In literacy.
and raised her hand and said, why did I not learn this? I just finished my program last year. Why is this not part of something that I'm learning? And we wish it was something that was provided to everybody, but we are so fortunate that the district continues to invest the resources into this professional development. And
I have the trainers.
fortunate that we are building something that, longevity wise will keep going.
Jovi can speak to it as the kindergarten teacher.
Yeah, Jovi was asking, what are the
Sure,
hard
you know,
question askers at that time?
Sure, no, I taught kindergarten, well, I taught for, gosh, what, about 23 years before I had that training, and it wasn't until I had that training, that, oh my gosh, we've been doing it wrong, we just didn't know, we didn't have the knowledge that we have now, the research, the basic. Just to see that change in the last 3 years that I taught kindergarten was just, it blew you away. The confidence and the power that these kids had and were able to do, and to actually put the code together was mind-blowing. It was really fascinating.
And Jovi is, at the very first training that we had in the kindergarten cohort, he raised his hand and he said, so why do we have so many level text if we know that level text is not what helps support students in learning to read? And Amy and I looked at each other then training together, and we both said, you're right. And so now the program that we have has significant volume of decodable text, which is really what's going to help build those skill sets for kids. and making sure that they're successful readers and decoders of text.
So I think, just kind of closing that out, you've had a chance now as a board to kind of see middle school, secondary and elementary, and just kind of reiterating what I had said last time. It was quite surprising when I arrived here and we didn't have coaches. And if I think back to even some of our adoptions, math expressions, any of the Lucy Calkins work, there wasn't that systemic piece. We didn't have a backbone structure. We were depending on, teachers in the classroom who after school could come to do a training, but they're exhausted. And, the benefits of being able to have our teachers supported, our principals supported, and really this ubiquitous support from our coaches is really impressive. And I appreciate you all taking time to be here tonight.
I like to think we're the executors, like, right, like your initiatives, it's like.
Not in a bad way.
I got this, it was like a SWAT team, like a response team, right? It's like teachers
I think
are.
we all have people. Yeah, and that's really how we operate, like
Yeah.
what teachers need, but also really being able to execute the visions and the initiatives that the district has decided is most important. If it's UDL, we were there doing modeling UDL lessons and giving, whatever supports teachers needed at that moment. And now as we move into these two new adoption curriculums and depth of knowledge and data, and how do we use this awesome data that we finally have that's really, really telling about where a student was at in our math journey. I think it's really exciting because we were boots on the ground.
Maybe we need a new title, like, maybe the job title should be like the teacher and student, like learning support, like rapid response team.
As new teachers come in and, you're talking about teachers who hadn't learned this before, how do we ensure that these type of results are long-lived? As first graders, we get some new teachers in, but we still keep seeing these.
Well, we're training them as they come in, so yes.
So you'll redo the training for the.
Oh, yeah, the cohort we had today was, any new teacher, new staff member to us that fits into any of the categories that we're requiring the training for. Yeah. After long days, Sophia decided to come still.
Very cool.
Yeah, so, and we added some resources. If you want to take a look at some of the resource development, they were of course a part, all of these fabulous humans were a part of the literacy protocol. Our third grade essentials extensions, iReady materials, so we've got lots of materials that they've helped facilitate generation of.
TLSRRT. Teacher leader support rapid response team.
Does not roll up.
No, no.
Thank you.
Yeah.
This is
Thank you.
very helpful. It is 6:00. Should we keep going? Okay, and no public input yet either, right? Just checking again. Nothing, so. Let's go back up to 2A.
We can slide that one and you could, if you want to go back to that, we can, or slide that one and you can go right into fundamental 2, since that kind of builds on maybe academic stuff they've been talking about.
Sure, okay, let's go to 2B then on fundamental 2, any language or monitoring updates to fundamental 2.
Yeah, so one of the things I think when reviewing it, I guess the last regular board meeting, in the agenda item, it said board policy 1800 OE2, and it said highest academic standards. Which I think I know what it means, and that's how I'd always read it. And then I actually looked at the language and it said maintain the highest learning standards. And I don't know what learning standards means. And I think the confusion, appears that perhaps we as a school district are not clear on it either, given that it was also mistitled in the agenda item from the 12th. More fundamentally to me, which is for, I think at another board meeting, but is how do we monitor this? What I felt and feel is missing is any consideration of the course offerings that we offer in our school district. And I'm not sure how we can maintain the highest learning standards or academic standards, and not review what courses we offer and what pathways there are for various students. So that's the beginning of the conversation. I think like the edit in terms of language, whether we, decide to vote on it today or in conjunction perhaps with another stab at the superintendent's interpretation of this fundamental, which, as I noted from our January 12th board meeting, I think does not say highest learning standards or say highest academic standards. It just will meet state standards, which seems a bit different. But yeah, I guess the first question is, and I don't know if anyone has history of what learning standards is supposed to capture that academic standards would not. And then two is sort of thoughts in terms of timing for, or I guess like maybe it's a board discussion about the superintendent's interpretation, which I feel it's not yours. It was, it predates you, although you're now the superintendent, so it's something that you inherited. Like I do not feel that it reflects what 2 is about.
So I'll just jump in and say, for me, the questions about the curriculum decisions and what things we offer is really in fundamental 1, because that's about differentiated instruction, student-centered education, and varied learning opportunities. And to me, varied learning opportunities, like that's about what we're teaching. No.
I think the other component of it, just historically, when the rewrite was being done of the interpretation of fundamental 2, is those different areas that you see broken out are the ones that are in the state standards. And so I think the learning standards and the academic standards, I think, are probably being used synonymously there. Because they were, what are those different core categories that Washington State has identified in terms of the standards that extend K through 12 on there. And there was quite a conversation about that, as I recall, at the board table, around what should the interpretation entail? Should it match exactly what OSPI has or slight deviation?
Yeah, just so you know, for history, when this came up 2 years ago, like I did not like the listing, like I did not like the order that these items were listed in. To me, it would have made more sense to have like English language arts, mathematics, et cetera, like first, and then the other stuff later. And also I quibbled with the fact that educational technology was listed on there, because that's not something that we're teaching. So why are we talking about highest learning standards in the areas of education? I don't know. Anyway, but the answer is we kept it like this because this is what the state uses.
Yeah, I mean, and I guess that's my issue.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, we say we have the highest learning, we have the highest academic standards.
Yeah.
And then we say, and that means we will meet state standards. And I do not think Mercer Island is a median school district or like one that just is, trying to barely clear the bar for state standards. And like, and even if, and that also doesn't like jive with highest academic or highest learning standards.
So in the superintendent's interpretation, we call it the same or higher level of cognitive demand. Parentheses, critical thinking as defined in Washington State learning standards. So we've got academic standards, you've got education standards, and we've got cognitive demand is all synonymous. And yet they all lead us to state standards, which is an interesting place to be. So 2 metrics I was thinking about that were at least interesting to me. So I reflect on the fact that we have the capstone project for band, which is really awesome. It is just a great penultimate project that, takes you into the best music schools, and it's a great portfolio. So what's the equivalent for STEM? So at least one metric that's an early metric, so that's called walk around. At least an early metric for me would be, can a student get, how many students do we have in calculus in grade 10 or grade 11? that's an interesting metric, because what we're finding is the kids in STEM are actually taking linear algebra, in high school. And then when they go to college, they are just so much more prepared. Even if they got a 40% on linear algebra in high school, they are still so much more prepared to do it again in college. And it makes a huge difference. So that would be one metric. One metric would be how many 10th graders or 11th graders, I think we'd probably start with 11th graders, achieve calculus. And then by definition, they would be able to do a higher level of math in 12th grade.
Or have the option to achieve calculus.
It's just the count of how many did that. So I would envision the count might be similar to how many take the band capstone project. It's not a huge number, but by having that ability over time trickles down to all the other courses that more and more kids have that capability. We've got.
So can you, I don't understand, I'm not seeing a correlation between a capstone project and advancing in a subject matter.
I think a capstone project for band is.
That's like putting together a portfolio that you can present of all your work. That's different than just taking a class.
It just represents a level of achievement that you are doing that, like it's equivalent to creating a thesis.
But doesn't a transcript say that based on the class they took? I just don't understand.
I'm just saying that it is the type of project that would appeal to people who are achieving the very highest levels of success in music.
I think a little bit of the confusion is because you earlier on, you said a capstone project. Where is the capstone project in STEM? So is that also something that you're interested in? Like if somebody wants to
Eventually,
do-
I was talking about crawl, walk, run.
Yeah.
Kind of the crawl would be, let's start out by looking at the 10th or 11th grade level. That's a crawl.
And I assume you also, if we have it in fine arts, that we would have it in visual arts, and we would have it in humanities, and we would have it
Yeah, we talked,
in
yeah.
DECA
Yeah.
topics. I mean, to me, this isn't I worry about, like picking groups of kids based on what they do. I mean,
STEM is a pretty big category, as is.
It's pathways. I mean, like, I get,
Right.
the
I
question
mean,
is,
there's-
what's our course catalog?
I mean, how many of our kids actually take calculus? And I don't think it's
And that's
because
a
they
problem.
can't.
That's.
Well, you think it's a problem, I don't think it's a problem. I think the kids that want to take calculus are able to take calculus. I think the kids that don't want to take calculus and see no purpose for what their dreams are ahead of them, don't need to take it. I took calculus, don't even know what it is, never used it in my life. If I was able to take business statistics or accounting or finance, I would have taken that as my fourth year advanced math rather than calculus. So you guys are in the world, well, you're at least in the world of STEM. So you're very focused on that. I think we really need to be looking at, we're a public school. We need to be looking at all of our students and the things like, if you're trying to talk about, if you want to talk about a capstone project for all of our seniors, that a lot of, especially private schools do, I think that's great, where they get a credit for it and they dive deep, like what college students do, a thesis or an independent study. That's fantastic. Let's let our kids choose what they want to do. And if they want to dive deep in linear algebra, they can do a project on that. If they want to dive deep in fine arts and put together a portfolio, amazing. If they want to do some sort of debate or communications thing or radio project, awesome, go for it. I mean, I think what turns, at least it turns me off, I'll speak for myself, is this very focus on, on these elitist groups, at least what's seen as elitist. We need to be focusing on all our kids and letting them each achieve their highest. If that's what you're saying, I wholeheartedly agree. If you're not saying that and want to do more for the kids that are already excelling in one particular area, they're gonna get there if they want to.
That's it. Like, then we have no job, we shouldn't be teaching them, right? Like those are the most accelerated, we have no job to do.
Dan,
The classes are already being offered. If they want to take calculus, they can take calculus. If they're 2 years ahead and want to go to UW and take linear algebra, there's kids,
I
there's a
don't think,
handful of kids that do that every year.
I think you're missing the issue though.
Or you're not explaining it well, so
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
asking you.
right.
to explain that.
So I guess what we're trying, I don't, getting a little bit more clarification on what we're trying to do here. So Dan, are you saying that we say that we are meeting the highest learning standards, but in the superintendent operation expectation, it doesn't list that? So then what I'm hearing is that are we identify what is our baseline that meets state standards? And then thinking beyond, right, also what Dave is saying, have other metrics like capstone or maybe, linear algebra and all these things, but then those are different options as the highest, right? Because like, how do I identify what is state standard? And that is our basic education. But it would be good to, within all these disciplines, right, to think within math, what is that next level to meet this standard? As in arts, what is that next level? And maybe we have it already, but we haven't really articulated what is baseline and what is, like, are we achieving more?
Well, I didn't want to boil the ocean, I guess was my point. I was using analogies of our band. Band is a very singular kind of marquee program for Mercer Island. And we've cultivated the band curriculum starting in 4th and 5th grade, all the way up to 12th. And we've got, multiple venues of band, whether it's orchestra and steel drums, and it really is a marquee curriculum in and of itself that produces intensely good musicians. I have no interest in it, right? But I see the value in that, right? I couldn't play guitar when I was forced to learn guitar as a kid, but I see the value in band, and I don't deny, and I wouldn't deny that program to kids in band. But what I'm thinking is on Mercer Island, we are lacking in STEM. And our support, and one simple way of how do we get a STEM curriculum that starts to mirror our band curriculum in terms of helping kids achieve the highest. We've got so many band kids achieving the highest levels of music players. We see it every graduation. It's not just 3 or 4 elite kids. It is a lot of kids because of how well cultivated the band program is. Can we do the same in STEM?
So maybe one of the things, so I'm thinking about a couple of things. One is before we say that we are offering everything we can, even in fine arts, we haven't necessarily done a review for you or shown you what that course catalog looks like. So before we say that we do or don't have enough STEM, there might be some room for some study session here to help you see what that course catalog really looks like and the pathways that exist. Then we can look at it and say, as a board, representatives of the community, you know what, this may be an area we are reviewing and looking at all the time. Right now, math continues to be a review as we do textbook reviews. And so I'm hearing some of it is bringing you into where these discussions happen and then kind of showing you the pathways. Then the other part that I'm hearing is, Andrews, if you'll bring up our website really quickly and go to the school board fundamentals 2. And then if you'll pull up the profile document from January 12th. This one? Yes, please. So the second part then that I'm hearing is, are we measuring the right things here? And or should we be looking at a couple different metrics that you're interested in as a school board to help us? Then the third part is, what does that superintendent interpretation look like? And does it reflect what is in the fundamental itself? So I feel like there's kind of 3 prongs here. Some of it's some learning that needs to happen. Some of it is maybe reviewing this. And then the third is if you agree that fundamental two says what you want it to say as a board, then superintendent, can you go back and review what that interpretation looks like and possibly do some tweaking based on the discussions that you're having and what the values are?
Yeah, I mean, to just try to like bring it concretely home about sort of the pathways and the courses that we offer. When I hear highest academic / learning standards, I say, okay, when I look at like math pathways is one, how do we compare to adjacent districts, to North Shore, like both, you know, where my understanding is 10% plus of sixth graders are taking algebra. Like,
So
how do
why
we,
are
well,
SBA scores so
well,
much higher?
well, SBA tells you just part of it. It just tells you like how many students are not failing.
Well, and what,
Right? Like, I mean, like,
enrollment
that's-
tells you how many kids are taking it, not
It's-
how many kids are
it's-
succeeding.
Well, we can get there, but I mean, the SBA tells you something, but it's just, I mean, it's just part of it. It's by no means the whole story in a district like ours, and certainly not if you're trying to capture highest learning standards.
Isn't it highest learning standards for each student? I
Well,
mean, otherwise, we're gonna have 99% of our kids feeling like failures.
no, because what you're saying by offering an advanced course, we can't do that because some kids
Who
will
said,
not.
I never said that.
Okay, well, like.
I said it's being offered. Our kids aren't signing up for it. That's why
It's-
there isn't an in-person. class.
We don't have the pathways that get you there.
Sure we do.
We'll get
You've got
there.
algebra, geometry, algebra 2. The kids can start earlier if their abilities and interests
We just
aligns.
We just.
And then there's pre-calculus, and then there's calculus.
Say,
Which is the standard pathway for
Wait,
Bellevue School
wait,
District, by the way.
That's our pathway.
I'm gonna say that.
But it's not the
I-
highest.
Hey, but Dan,
To be
can I
honest,
talk?
yeah.
Thank you. This seems like a great topic for like a study session, maybe. Like, not, I don't mean this, what's on the agenda, but I mean the bigger topic of like our STEM pathways, math in particular, I have lived this on both sides with kids that are like behind in math and kids that would have liked to have been able to do more in math. Ironically, my son is now in his first year of college and he couldn't take a math class this year because he'd done too much at Mercer Island High School. So like, I'd love to dive more into this, but I would like to stay on topic with the actual, like, what we're saying about this, like, for example, when I look up learning standards, like on the OSPI website, they're basically setting some very minimum standards for like what kids should learn in reading, for example, in math, for example. So I think that the question of like, are we offering the most advanced possible pathways for a public high school for like kids who are really, really serious about math, dedicated to math, want to learn more, need it for what they want to do in life? You know, I feel like that's a little different question. So that may be something we want to put into our fundamental, you know, that we're like pushing the boundaries of like what is possible, that we're creating the most advanced possible pathway for kids who are interested in STEM. I'm just saying, like, that it's there, I feel like we're actually talking about like 2 or 3 different topics here that are kind of all smushed together.
I think doing a review of our course offerings is great, because I don't understand, I mean, we've got robotics, we've got, what's it called? The things that fly around, drones. We have, I'm sorry, not my word, we have computer science, we have AP computer science, it's getting more and more popular. I know it doesn't meet your standards, but, we also, I know, struggle finding teachers for it. So, I don't understand we've got robotics club where tons of kids participate. That's a capstone project in and of itself. They're developing robots that do things. So
Maybe.
I think the challenge is, Deborah, you're not an expert in the field.
I'm not an expert in the field. That's why I'm asking these questions, but you're not an expert in education, which is why our job
No,
as
but I'm
a
an expert
board
in
is to
technology.
ask our experts in education the questions.
And so I've got 2 metrics, so I'll come back, 2 metrics, the board gets to change 2 things, one is fundamental 2, I'm kind of okay with that, the other one is what we monitor. So the 2 metrics for me, I'll just put out there, 2 metrics for me would be how many kids achieve calculus by 10th grade and by 11th grade, and I'd like to see that number go up. And then the second metric would be how many teachers have STEM degrees. Those would be my 2 metrics.
What about STEM degrees and or as another item, additional training in STEM, for example, additional training in how to teach STEM classes effectively?
So I think, so a couple things. If we're gonna go down this road, I do think we have a lot of other voices and perspectives that should probably be part of a conversation around courses that are being taught. You have phenomenal educators who have been doing this for a long time, as long as some of our coaches here tonight, who can help maybe explain what it is that we're doing in some of our courses. There is an element that you're asking of an HR question that before we talk about whether or not to measure it or not, maybe we need to do some learning about what it takes to get the credentials and how endorsements work and some of that. Because that might help, you know, paint that picture a little bit of what that looks like. But I do think Director Tucker, and I saw Director Din kind of nodding that, you know, a study session where we identify what is the questions that we want as a board to answer. And then as a staff, we can think about who are the right people and how might we phrase that. However we do it, there's a lot of passion amongst you as a board because you care about education. And that's one of the great things about our district. I think your passion certainly came through tonight in appreciation of our coaches. I think it also came through 2 weeks ago. And there were some poignant and hard questions for our staff who were here. If we're going to bring staff, I think we have to make sure we're thinking about how are we going to be asking those questions and what that's going to look like. What I'm getting at is it's okay to disagree and have your disagreements at this table, and that's you as a board get to do that. I think our secondary coaches didn't have the same experience as our elementary coaches tonight. And I think we need to be sensitive that if we're going to ask staff to come, that we're looking for their expertise. We're not putting them on the stand and really grading them or really, you know, grilling them. Because that's going to put them on the defensive. If we're going to have them here, what's their expertise? And if we then don't agree that we have everything we need to set new metrics, and then that's how we go.
I just want to say one last thing, which is just as far as the language of like highest learning standards versus highest academic standards. I wouldn't be comfortable with changing it from learning to academic because I feel that that is not inclusive of like all of our learners. I think that highest learning standards is a term that means every student learning to the best of their ability to maximize their potential. Whereas if you say highest academic standards, those may be standards that like some kids just aren't able to meet because of where they're at in terms of their learning style or their, you know, situation. So I prefer the term learning if we're talking about that. And I do want to say that also some of this discussion, what you're talking about should affect kind of fundamental one with the varied learning opportunities. So just to have in mind that there's two fundamentals really that we're thinking about here.
So I appreciate, Dan, that you brought this up, and like, I agree, I don't think there's anything wrong with this. It's in our implementation and how we interpret it, and it's not consistent. And so your plan, but I think makes sense of your 3 prongs of what you bring to the board to kind of think about, to understand what we have right now, what are basic, and then what is extra, kind of the highest. I do agree, kind of look at other school districts because we're so close that people talk, and you know, whether it's right or not, at least we should compare and we should have a rationale on why we chose one versus the other and why we chose to do it the Mercer Island way. You know, but if we don't have that rationale, then it doesn't really matter to parents, right? So I think we should look at the other school district. And actually, when I hear you talk, David, what I hear from the band example, even though we have all these classes, what is so amazing about the band is the culture. You know, kind of like the fostering of the love of the band and really part of the community culture. And so just the fact that we have all these classes does not create a culture, a STEM culture. And so I think what I'm hearing when you talk, David, it makes me say, if we're really reaching the highest, it's not just offering the classes, but how do we inspire this culture for students to really go into this different pathway and really allow them to hit their highest, you know, possibility. And we offer as best as we can, you know, all these options. But I think beyond the class, later on, not now, I mean, classes start first, but then how do we create a culture of really aspiring to be the best that we can be wherever that is.
I mean, I think on a positive example, but I think that shows the need for reviewing our offerings is last week. There was the AMCA, the American Math Competition at the middle school. 30 to 40 students like showed up to take it. As far as I'm aware, there was minimal notification from the administration to students, letting them know of the opportunity to participate in it. In spite of the lack of publication widely of that opportunity, a lot of people in our district showed up and are passionate about math. That is what they are focused on. And it's not because parents are pushing them, it's because like that's their passion. Like certain students, it's band, certain students, it's softball, students, it's drama. But math and science offerings are, and I think the question is how, when we say highest academic standards, how is that hitting to the extent feasible in every category, wherever that may be, whether it's band or fine arts, and I get like at a certain point, it might be too niche, too small for us as a district to offer it. But let's be clear of what we can offer and what we can't and the reasons for it. And as I said, going back, like when one looks, and we'll get to some of the data later, but like math, I mean, the evidence is there is a huge amount of passion on the island that it doesn't seem as being fully capitalized on.
So hearing no changes necessarily right this moment. We've got some learning, we've got some work to do. That might lead to some changes. What I would say is, to your point, Director D'Souza, when you say we're not trying to boil the ocean, I appreciate that, because we have the Long Range Facility Master Plan Committee, Long Range Facility Committee. We have not a superintendent search, that's done. We have a principal search. We have, we're heading into, discussions around RIF and some other stuff. We have budget things, so we've got a lot of things kind of going as a district. So I think we've got to think, where does this play out? So between now and perhaps definitely our meeting, when we're doing agenda setting, I'll be thinking about kind of timelines and where this might fit in. As a board though, I think coming back on the 9th and having that kind of timeline discussion, I fully appreciate the urgency of this. Our kids only have one kindergarten year. They've only got one 8th grade year and one senior year. And just like we don't want to decimate programs by trying to repair our budget all in one swoop and take away from kids, we know we need to move. So what do we need to move on within all of the other things coming at you as a board and the superintendent, and then therefore this. So.
Yeah, that is fair. I think the other side about this though is to what degree does the board micromanage the evolution of the courses? And other metrics. So the reason for my 2 metrics, I've done some studies of what kids entering college have with respect to math. And so that's what leads me to calculus in 10th grade or 11th grade. So that's from understanding STEM kids. So that's one. And so putting that metric in allows people downstream to achieve that metric. And I don't have to become an expert in math pathways. So that's one valuable thing. The other one, as we've talked about in this room, is a STEM focused degree. So if you're a STEM kid like me, I couldn't play guitar, though I had to do that anyway, but I could do math and I could take multiple math courses at the same time, blah, 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 blah. And a STEM focused degree, you have that mindset that STEM is easier and more achievable, and maybe English and social studies is the hard thing. And so thinking about, is our curriculum or are our studies being developed and evolved by people with STEM degrees? Again, allows me to, as a manager, say, okay, it's in the hands of educators and experts who have a much better relationship to all this type of work and have blended the two together without me having to learn, what education is, what micromanage the evolution. So that would be my thoughts.
And I think back to policy governance, where that micromanagement of how we might go about thinking about course offerings and student access to course and removing barriers. I think that's where it comes in of the board, is you're setting the bar and the expectation. And if you're starting it to just use your example, if you're starting it as how many students are taking 10 in calculus in 10th grade in the 22-23 school year, then that becomes a piece. We've seen districts that say we want to see 80% of all our third graders reading proficiently, at some point. This is a similar piece, only you're looking at it differently. It sends a message to us about what we can work on, what barriers we need to look at. And then also thinking about our students and what are they saying and what are the factors that come into that. But having you stay at that vision, mission, values, and goal setting level helps us then to really know what are the banks of the river, and then let us navigate that river with the really talented educators that we have, checking in with you and providing that feedback.
And I think that, I just happened to pull up Bellevue, like math offerings, and they do have a linear algebra. It's at one school, but they associate it with Bellevue College. So our kids have those opportunities too. So my point in saying that they can get it if they want it, it's there, and it's juniors and seniors who have at least more of an ability with transportation. So my point is, we're a public school and we're funded based on student enrollment. So we can only do so much. Maybe we need to do a better job, and I think we do need to do a better job, and I think we have been doing that. I think that's been recognized, that we need to make sure that our students who have that interest know how they can get it, know how they can get credit for it, and know how they can get support from the district in doing it. So when I'm not saying that anything you're saying is not important, and we absolutely should have those offerings for those students. My point is, we need to look at everybody, not just your specific interest, but also it's there. It might not be easy to get because, I don't think it's that hard for so many of our seniors go to Bellevue College. It's right there. And that's kind of always been the way it's been, because we don't have enough kids to offer it. Now, the state, if they want to change how they fund our classes, of course we should offer it here.
I didn't say anything about courses. I said we should put in 2 metrics. I didn't say anything about courses.
I think
Let's
those
see
are
what those
probably
two metrics do.
easily ascertainable. I mean, how many kids are 2 years ahead? And we know those kids that are 2 years, or I support those metrics.
So we
I
should
don't see
put
any
those 2
problem.
metrics in.
With the calculus,
How many 10th graders have achieved calculus? How many 11th graders have achieved calculus?
Baby calculus.
Yeah. And how many teachers have STEM degrees?
And I would also like, at least for me, and like maybe this is adding too much, but like there's one of the things that's thrown out there all the time is like, we don't want to like put too many advanced offerings because people, like students will fail. And so like, I would like to know like the pass rates, like, I mean, are these students like successful in those courses?
I think, and I think that is the thing, and this could be hard to gather or not, but just because a district requires all kids to take whatever doesn't mean that all kids are doing well. And I think that there's a corollary, I think that we have to be careful when we just look at, and so I'm agreeing with you, when we just look at kids taking something. Because we can also say how many students are going to 4-year colleges, but how many are graduating in 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, and there is that report that we get from some colleges. And then also how many are going and then choosing to transfer to a different school. That's okay too.
or going in saying they're gonna major in engineering and end up majoring in literature, which
But
is tons. of
Which is,
kids.
and I think all of it just being, it's not enough just to, we always say, we don't want kids just to go to college. We want them to thrive in college. We want them to experience it and get it. We want them to not just take a course, but do well in the course. And I think that that's important.
And I think
Appreciate it.
where like the rubber hits the road and why it's important, and I had a conversation at PTA advocacy. But anyways, like in terms of math pathways and testing in at the elementary school for middle school and sort of concerns and just wondering like how that looks. And for me as a board member, one of my questions is, are we setting that number correctly? Like, are we creating an obstacle for students who want to and actually disincentivizing like those students who are reaching? Or are they in place because they serve a good reason?
And I think that that exact kind of question, I think is really helpful. Because then we as a staff can go back and we can bring forward the lived experience of, you know, what are the different implications that teachers have experienced in terms of kids, not just access, but readiness and preparation and why we've chosen some of those, and to make sure it's transparent. Again, just like the budget.
And what do other districts do? Like, you know, those.
Sure, and what they might do may not lead to the success, but I think it's, if we don't like necessarily what we're doing, what do we need to do upriver? Or downriver as we're thinking about this, so it really is systemic and this helps us with direction. And what I'm not sure about, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I just, if we are we gonna make the change now? Are we not going to, you don't review this for another year. So it's not like this metric has to be changed tonight, but if it is important, you know, I just want to make sure we don't lose sight of that.
Well, let's answer that question first.
Well, and that's actually what I was gonna comment on. Was that what your comment?
No, I have a different.
So I'm not gonna stand in anyone's way. I think finding out who's taking calculus would take someone about 12 seconds to find out. So that's fine. I think it's putting the cart before the horse in terms of like, if we're gonna do a deep dive into what is this math pathway.
But it's not a cart that's gonna hurt anyone.
Like I said, I'm not standing in the way. I don't think that's big.
Yeah.
The STEM thing, in terms of teachers, I don't understand. Because I don't understand what the purpose is.
Well, it's a number that's not gonna necessarily change very fast over.
I don't know what
year,
it means
you know?
either.
I don't have any objections. to either
Diversity
of
of
those two.
education background.
I would want to know just what's the interest, because I might be able to get you more important information that you may want, is the only thing. And if you're ready tonight to answer that, or we want to think.
No,
about it.
I think the interest is, do we have people thinking about curriculum from a STEM point of view, that's what it would drive. Like, if you've got teachers with STEM backgrounds that can think about it from a STEM point of view, you've got teachers with music backgrounds, you get a really great music curriculum. If you get teachers with liberal arts backgrounds, you get a very great liberal arts curriculum.
And David,
I
if you
think-
don't have teachers with a STEM background, you might need to bring someone in to help with thinking about that.
Don't they need, like, if they're a biology teacher, don't they need to have, especially, high school, to teach high school science?
Well,
don't you
and I
need-
think that's where this conversation would help to bring Erin and her team with Rosie to kind of explain, how does credentialing work? And what does that look like to be able to teach? And there are some that are emergencies. So, because as you're saying, Director Lurie, you know, there was for a long time as part of the No Child Left Behind, then there became do we have highly qualified teachers teaching different courses? That's been manipulated over time because of teacher shortages or whatnot, but you're interested to know, you know, what do our teachers bring? What's really interesting on that I don't know if we'd be able to show is, you know, we may have an elementary teacher who has a chemistry degree, but they have an elementary endorsement because that's what they wanted to do. Just like we may have a high school teacher with a biology degree, but so, you know, what they bring to the table, it can be really wide. I was a history major, you know, not a, not a education major. That wasn't even a thing in my college.
So David, are we asking for a report? Just kind of one-time report, or do you
No,
want to
it
report
would be
it?
part of the metrics that would show
The
up
metrics.
next year.
So if it's at the metrics, I don't like metric just kind of reporting out, but then are there metric of like, you know, does it reflect kind of the percentage of like credentials really reflect the offering that we have? So because if we're just reporting out, then if it's like we have a bad reporting, then what are we gonna do with that, right? But are we moving forward to kind of making sure there's alignment of what we offer and having the right credential? So I guess it's like, I agree with that, but how do we frame it in a way that is not just reporting out and then we're like, oh, that's nice. And then,
Well, we get all these reports for Fundamental 2 today that tell us how many students took AP courses and all that type of stuff, but it just would be another line in that.
so you just want a report. I kind of like, more of a little bit higher expectation in that, what do we have and how do we make sure that, our credentialing reflects kind of our priority areas, you know, so those kind of things for me, gives us a goal.
Well, I think what David was saying, and tell me if I'm incorrect, is like, for instance, like the last board meeting when it came, like the supplemental information, which was great on, diversity for staff. And then breaking it down and showing how we compare to other school districts, was enormously helpful, at least for me, to sort of see, that I think, we in many other districts could do better, but, that Bellevue, for whatever reason, seems to be doing a particularly good job in attracting and retaining diverse teachers. And so I think this, is sort of a similar metric that when we look at subject areas, what are the backgrounds of the teachers for those subject arears?
I agree,
so,
but the
like-
diversity thing, just because those numbers, that's why I don't like it.
Well,
They kind of report it, and we're like, so it doesn't force us to hold anybody accountable ourselves or the superintendent or anybody accountable to kind of, are we gonna hit at least,
Well, at least now it says like where that Bellevue is doing,
so that's.
the Bell-
I would elevate that level.
that we could, try to like.
For fundamental
He's good at
too,
that.
maybe we want to start bringing in our department chairs from the high school to give us an overview of their curriculum through the high school and saying whether or not they have any suggestions on where there might
But
be
they
some
can do
gaps.
it without us. I mean,
Well, and they should.
I mean, they're doing this all
I
the
think
time.
that's my point.
And, and I think that's part of what's in the OE 10 of the superintendent is all around what's happening in the courses. You want a little bit more visibility into what that might be. And it might take a while to kind of circulate through some
I
of
think
them.
the issue is we wanting to see if the outcomes. The board is all about outcomes. What are the outcomes? And I shouldn't really care how they achieve those outcomes, right? And so that's why how many kids are achieving calculus in 10th and 11th grade is an outcome. And I think that type of outcome, those kids are prepared to succeed well in the highest and best or whatever STEM curriculum they want to go into in college. Right, so that's why I'm.
It sounds like there's consensus for that one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the other one that.
And so then
I don't
the
understand.
STEM, the STEM background for teachers, again, I think is about. It's about competency in an area.
I mean, they're accredited. I don't know what,
I mean, everybody teaching a course, I'm sure everybody's accredited. I don't have any doubt that we.
When they aren't, we have to bring you.
Yeah.
To approve anyone who's out of the doors. is what we call.
Are
So,
you
so I think that,
wanting to go ahead with that second one, or are you wanting to like? Wait till we've had like a study session and had heard more from HR and looked at maybe some other metrics that could be used. in place of that?
I'm happy to propose them both, and then HR can come back and tell me I can't do it, or we can start the number at 0. And then when we hire people, we increment.
I have no problem with either.
I just don't want, I just want you to be careful as a board that you're not sending a message to your staff, to our staff, that you don't think they're qualified. That's my one worry when you say, what's that? I don't know how it's interpreted, and you're the board. I'm the superintendent. We're always looking for the very best educators, and if we're concerned about that, I would love to bring to you, how do we make sure that we have the very best in front of you? And then you can ask questions after that, just being transparent.
Well, I mean, we look at racial and gender data and, for like similar reason to sort of say like, what could we be doing better? But like the first step in terms of attracting is at least understanding what is the profile, right? So like, I don't think, hopefully, like there's no one takes umbrage by saying just because we want to understand like what the profile is, and like how we may.
That's why exactly, but that's why I'm asking, what's the interest? So we know what that is, because taken out of context, someone may not fully understand what your interest is on that. And then it can be seen as, why does the board need to know about all of our credentials? I just want that to be clear for everyone who's watching, and how that looks is, what is that interest? I hear that the interest is, what kinds of credentials do we have amongst our teachers that are in front of our kids each and every day? I think it would be helpful to know what is the process we go through as a school district as soon as we're looking at hiring. What do we expect in our hiring process for people to submit in terms of their credentials. It kind of feeds in a little bit to the discussion last week around seniority lists, because even in our seniority list, we have all kinds of different credentials right in there. So what are the different topics? I just think there's a lot of information to provide you first without.
Yeah, and I'm not proposing this as one to add right now, but I'm interested in kind of continuing education type STEM hours, like I would hope we would want to be encouraging our staff, like I know they're actually required to take a certain number of STEM related education hours as part of their continuing ed recertification, like every for many years, right? So like, it'd be nice to know, like, what are they learning? You know, like, that's kind of a topic I'd be interested in, right? Like, is this all teachers across, like, is that true? Like,
So anyone with a, who's teaching in a STEM, course, then they have to take a certain number, is it 15 credits, Aaron? You know,
For STEM, I
for
think it's
STEM?
15, yeah.
15 credit hour, credits in your 5 years. So there are responsibilities around STEM and around kind of equity and social emotional learning for principals. There's and others, each of us have some things we have to focus on. We have to get 100 total.
Yeah.
And a certain number have to be in certain areas to maintain our credentials.
which would be something interesting, I think, for me at least, and for the rest of the board to hear a little bit more about at some point, just because like somebody who's already in the schools teaching STEM courses, they're not gonna go out and get most of the time, like another degree. They're not gonna go get a master's degree in, teaching math or whatever if they don't already have one. But this is an area where they can improve their skills and hopefully become better teachers of STEM materials, which is the goal.
15 for, thank you for our staff who's helping me out here.
Yeah.
15 for,
Got my thing.
I mean, I'm just checking up on them, okay? 15 for every elementary teacher, and then if you're in other areas in terms of middle school.
Not to stir the pot more, but I'm gonna stir the pot a little more and say, 2 years ago, I didn't like how this list was ordered, and I like it even less after this discussion. So I would like to propose that as long as we keep all the items in there that are, part of the state standard, that we reorder the items as follows, okay? So I'm gonna read it, how it is now, and then I'm gonna read it how I'm proposing it, okay?
Are you ready to make a motion just so we can at least capture
Yes.
it that way?
Yes.
Okay.
I move that we change the ordering of the areas in this fundamental. Okay, right now it says maintain the highest learning standards in the areas of fine arts, health and physical education, English language arts, mathematics, financial education, science, environment and sustainability, social studies, world languages, computer science, and educational technology. Okay, my proposal is maintain the highest learning standards in the areas of English language arts, mathematics, science, social studies, computer science, environment and sustainability, financial education, fine arts, health and physical education, world languages, and educational technology. And the reason for that order is that I think English and math are at the core of what we teach, and if you can't read a word problem. So I'm putting English ahead of math just for that reason.
4 years required by the State Board of Ed.
And it's more years required by the State Board of Ed. And then math, and then science is pretty critical in today's world, and also has a lot of requirements associated with graduation. Social studies comes right after that. Coincidentally, those things are also alphabetical. And then computer science comes right after that, because that is like in my opinion, a basic science and critical for kids to at least be very familiar with, to go out into the working world. And then everything else after that is just alphabetical, but I'm comfortable with the order that goes into: environment, sustainability, financial education, fine arts, health and physical education, world languages. And then I slapped on educational technology at the end because that is part of the state description, and I guess it's supposed to be in here. So I just wrote on it.
Well, educational technology just means you're learning how to use technology.
I guess, but like, I don't know where to like.
I don't
You
need to
need a
be
second
overly,
or
like, well, I don't wanna be like overly semantic on this, but I prefer the hodgepodge because I don't want like a hierarchy.
It's alphabetical though.
Yeah, but then,
No, my version is alphabetical.
but like, maybe I would was listening to explanation about like sort of, but my perception of that it was reordered of a perceived like hierarchy of subjects.
It's like the core subjects. They're
Do
all
you have
alphabetical.
you have a second on that? You don't
Oh,
have a
yes, I
second.
do have a second.
I agree with both in the, I don't want it to be, I understand the hierarchy, yeah, I know. But my recommendation is to, do what you just did, is alphabetize it.
Yeah.
Then that's fine.
Alphabetizing.
It's
As
alphabetized.
long as it's clear that it's not.
It's alphabetized by the core subjects, and then it's alphabetized. Oh, sorry.
Okay,
Can I have a second?
second for,
For purposes of discussion, at least, so it's alphabetical by the core subjects, and then it's alphabetical by the kind of, what I think of honestly is like bonus subjects.
Did you look into why it's the way it is?
No, but from like a legal standpoint, help me out here, you guys, like, as long as we list all the items, I don't think it should matter, whereas like, to me, it makes a statement, at least, that the board feels that the core subjects are important to mention first, and then, like, I don't think putting physical education ahead of like science
It's
make.
not ahead of, it's just listed in it, there's no priority list.
I know, but
I
I'm
just
thinking
think
like,
it's
why?
dangerous to,
So why
I
not
think,
put it on
my
there?
understanding is that this list is taken directly from the State Board of
No,
Education.
as we added to it, it just got tacked to the end.
Right, because State Board of Ed added it on,
Like computer science, it just tacked to the end.
but I think because that's what State Board of Ed did. As they added it, we
Like
added it.
financial education actually was later than computer science, and it's listed in the middle.
So as I recall, I think OSPI's website's been updated. Truth be told, they are now alphabetical. They weren't before. It used to be by year, so you're both correct. But they have updated this because it goes, the years go 2017, 18, 18, 11, 21, 9. OSPI's website had just been adding them on. That's why the order was, it is now alpha on their website.
I
which
think
is
we
a
should,
change.
Match that.
for purpose of discussion, I think we should match OSPI.
Yeah. Alphabetize everything.
Which is what I thought we had, so if we didn't, then I'm happy to correct that.
Yes, I would support alphabetize, yeah, everything.
So where's can you
But you,
share
you
a
might
link
make the
right
order
to
they
the
have.
OSPI order? Can we put it up?
Sure. Andres, if you just type in OSPI learning standards. That's it right there. And then scroll down. And essentially, that's what we have. We don't have in there first to third grade for early learning and those kinds of things. But we have the others, so you can kind of see the years, but you see the alpha.
Where's the math?
Mathematics is on the right.
Oh,
third
there
one
it is,
down.
2 columns, I see,
I think alphabetical makes,
Everything.
sure.
because that's a clear order, there's no priority, there's no.
So we have a motion that we're going to,
So are we modifying, can I modify my motion then to say we'll adopt the OSPI order, but leaving out the items that we don't have, which means arts, it would be arts, computer science, educational technology, English language arts. We wouldn't separately list out English language proficiency because we don't now. Environment and sustainability, financial education, health and PE, mathematics, science, social studies, and world languages.
Can we just put something? Okay, sorry to introduce, put on the consent agenda, just because it's like.
Sure.
I would just like, and then just to see if there's any questions we can have for discussion, like.
For next time.
For next time.
Yep.
Great.
Thank you all. I'll send that list.
and then what about the stat around calculus and STEM teachers?
I move that we add that to the monitor.
So can we handle those separate?
I'm clear about your first calculus. I'm clear about the calculus. I'm not clear what we'd be adding for the teacher component. So that might need more specificity as you go through.
My thought was, is it sort of Bachelor of Arts degrees and a Bachelor of Science degree? Very basic.
Probably with that wouldn't capture them someone, like my wife, like majored in mathematics at a liberal arts college. What would that?
Yeah, okay, I guess.
No, like,
That would be math, yeah, that would be math.
That's why I just don't understand
Like, am
the
I,
purpose of that.
So STEM subjects. A bachelor's in one of the STEM subjects.
But then do we wanna know how many have music degrees and how many have other, cause I don't
Well, it's only
understand.
because we feel comfortable with those programs. I mean, do you want to go change our music program? I'm not.
No, but none of us are creating that curriculum. I just don't understand. I don't understand the purpose of it.
I just want to know if the curriculum is being created by people with.
So of our teachers who are teaching STEM and you're wondering about their credentials, not all the credentials, because you might have a teacher who's teaching the orchestra who could have a math degree, but that's not what you're as interested in.
You know, I think it's okay. I wouldn't mind counting that. I mean, we've got technology infusing into so many things. I mean, right, we have a digital music class, we've got digital art classes.
What would it say, Director D'Souza, just as I'm just kind of thinking this, what does it say that your superintendent has a history degree? And then I have a master's in, you know, to get my, I have a master's in policy, a doctorate in something else. I do not have a STEM degree. So what should I think of that as your superintendent if you're only looking for STEM?
And yet you ran
Degrees.
learning services for how many years? I mean, it's ahead of-
And I'm not worried about mine, but I'm just thinking about our staff who doesn't have that. What are we saying about that?
It's the same thing as we say, how many people have taken physics AP classes or computer science AP classes or whatever. It says the same thing as that. What is that? That doesn't mean kids who didn't take physics AP are bad. It's just a number. Right? Who has an interest in this? We're assuming that today when we come in, everybody has a degree of some sort, there's an education degree. Right? That's the assumption.
Well,
So,
they have to get certified.
Everyone has to have a BA to be.
yeah, everyone has to have that. So the interest right now is what's our STEM capacity, because everyone else has, I mean, by default for this. It's just like, on a diversity report, I don't know if we track how many Caucasians there are, we're tracking all the other races.
No,
But-
we track that.
But,
I'm
I
just,
mean, then another number would be how many people have a degree, which is everybody.
that's everybody.
Yeah, so,
But go ahead.
So what I'm hearing is like, so if we ask specifically for STEM, that means that we have identified it as maybe our strategic kind of priority. And that we're gonna focus on that and we're making.
No.
movement in that.
actually, no, because it's a big, long list of metrics that we have, right?
But so then if we're just kind of make so that it doesn't feel targeted, I wouldn't mind to understand kind of similar to what I said. Kind of, do we have like expertise and just understanding of what is the connection, right? So maybe look at it as a whole, but I think sometimes if you look at just like a group of folks, it might seem targeted and like what Fred is saying, like what is the purpose? If the purpose is for us to grow that area and we want more, but I think we have to kind of have that first to say, hey, this is an area we want to grow. And we want to make sure that we have more folks with credential and just to grow this area. Versus what right now that we're just coming in to ask, it would seem kind of targeted. So I wouldn't mind talking about like wanting to grow the STEM area.
Well, we don't know. I mean, unless I know this number, we don't know if we've got a lack of STEM or too little or too much. We don't know, right? I mean, I won't say it's a strategic priority without knowing the basics.
I can tell you as your superintendent that every teacher who was part of the selection of the math tests all came out of the math department. They all have math degrees. These are people, a former board member was on the committee who taught math at the U and science. So we do make a concerted effort to make sure that the people who are making decisions about curriculum, designing courses, that they do have the appropriate credentials. I will tell you that. And I think that that is extremely important to the integrity of the teaching. Now, I've had a different conversation. Director Lurie and I were having a great conversation around CTE And that is a more challenging avenue for all of us in education right now because of the industry experience that's needed. But yet, how do we get those people in when we are only offering a 0.2 or a 0.4? Sometimes it's like Joe Bryant, who comes in willing to take a lesser, builds the program, all of a sudden he's full time. But that's one that's a little trickier, is the CTE one.
And we track that too.
Yeah.
I mean, and we always.
We track that, but we don't look to see what experience our teachers teaching CTE classes have that are relevant to the industry.
We bring,
I mean,
so
I'm
we have,
sure HR knows that.
and we bring so we have out of endorsement lists, and then we also have to maintain anyone who's getting basically kind of an emergency credential in order to teach CTE. That's a report that all goes into our Perkins grant reporting and everything going to the state to maintain certification.
Okay, so I'm sensing trepidation around the STEM degree thing, so I'm happy to withdraw it, and we'll just do the one on 10th graders and 11th graders doing, so I move that we include as part of our metrics, the number of 10th graders and number of 11th graders who have taken calculus safety.
Second.
Thank you, and all in favor? Aye. Opposed? So that also qualifies. And we can add this to the agenda as well. Yeah. Cases in discussion. Okay, sorry, thank you.
Can you take a break?
Yeah, should we 7 o'clock? Let's come back, 7:01, let's come back at 7:06.
Thank you.
How about we do 10, just because 5 is pretty,
Okay, let's come back at 7:10.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's see, let's get this episode rolling again. Okay, we are back from recess, and let's move on to item 2D, financial administration approval of the HICAP program plan, IGRA.
Great. So each year, there are a couple of I-grants that we bring forward to you. The TBIP, the Transitional Bilingual Instructional Program is one. And the HICAP is another example. These are requirements by OSPI in order to access our school apportionment. I fully know and what I have appreciated about being part of this governance team is that we continue to commit to the no surprises, and we've already had conversations around this. So I know that there's concern about certain elements of this that Director Glowitz and I have talked about. So the report tonight is, what does the grant look like that we have to complete? And then the vote for you is whether or not you approve of how we've completed the grant. The grant has been submitted to OSPI. They've signed off. They're waiting for your approval as a board as the last step. I fully understand where different beliefs are around this, and so as the superintendent, I'm not here to stand in the way, but that's the context of what we're doing and what we're seeking tonight.
Can you say, what is it that this application would get us and or not get us?
I'm gonna turn it right over to our learning services team, who are at the front of this. So go ahead.
$136,000. Which is 5%. We're funded for HICAP at 5% of our total population. So it has nothing to do, that doesn't dictate, and they're very clear that that number isn't the number we're aiming to qualify or provide services for. That's just the funding model. So it's 5%, it's $136,000.
So everyone gets 5%, whether they're at 2% or 12%.
Correct.
And to be clear, like the Washington Administrative Code reference, which is 392-170-025, is not whether the board approves of the grant. It's whether it approves of the program,
Right,
which is perhaps a prerequisite, although it doesn't explicitly say what happens if the board, but it's not saying that the board approves or disapproves of highly capable, program. It's whether the board thinks that the program satisfies its obligations.
right. And the grant is OSPI's attempt to gather from all 295 districts what the program looks like, what you do offer, and is it compliant and does it meet that? That's different than whether or not you as a board believe that the program is what you would want it to be in order for us to apply. So absolutely would not disagree with that. So why don't I turn it over to our learning services team with Director Prescott, Director Wood, just to talk through what's in the grant. Take questions on that, and then you can have a discussion. We'll answer questions about what isn't enough, what is enough, and then you can move to vote if you so choose.
Andrew, so if you could scroll down, the first few pages are basic. I know you had this in your board packet, but it's contact information. It's saying we want to agree to comply with the RCWs and WACs, and as outlined, and that we're wanting to accept money. So that's the first few pages. If we scroll down, keep going. So here it's, we check a box. One is that we use the state's definition, or we use a unique definition that integrates elements of the state's definitions. We went through 4 or 5 years ago a process of really trying to separate the idea of academically talented, high cap and gifted. And we did several activities as an advisory group, and we really weren't going to reach consensus. And so we opted to stay with the state's definition because different people came with different lenses, and ultimately we are charged with, we have to meet at least the state's definition of highly capable. And so we stuck with that definition. So that box is checked. And if you keep going,
So here is where, we have to do things like, publicly notify. We have to have assurances that we have a process that's outlined in policy, and procedure. We have to get permission in order to test a student. And we have to get permission that a parent or family agrees for the services to be provided. Then there's things that you have to include as far as permission to test, what that needs to include, what the permission to start the services includes. And then we get into the part about screening, assessment, identification. And so if you look at the screening process, we have a documented screening process. And we only screen in K1 and 2 for primary enrichment services. So that's the only place that we give a screener. It's given universally to all kindergartners. And here is what we're given by the state. Like, these are the things that they have identified as the assessments that are used for the screening process. And so if you look through, there's cognitive, there are academic, there's creativity, there's rating scales and informal measures. So when we do a screener specifically for primary enrichment, we use the COGAT. What's listed in what's provided from the state is the older versions of the COGAT. We use the most current version and form of both the COGAT and Iowa when we administer the assessments. So when we look at the primary enrichment screening, we are specifically looking at COGAT. We don't look at other measures. That is our screener. And then students who score in the 97th percentile or higher nationally move on, and then they do what we call portfolio review. In that portfolio review process, they take Iowa assessment specifically in math, because that's the area targeted for our primary enrichment services. We also have teachers who then complete a gifted rating scale, which goes through, I don't know, 80 to 90 different characteristics and traits of students who are potentially identified as gifted. We also look at their Ames Web scores and now their benchmark data, and we try to get an idea of students who would be best served through primary enrichment services. That information goes to a multidisciplinary review committee. They look at the student's whole portfolio and make determinations of qualification. So that's the screener part, and we'll spend a little more time talking about the full assessment process. When we look at the assessment process, again, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different areas that the state is looking for us to assess in as possibilities. We're not mandated to do all 5, but we can choose to do them. It's recommended that we use the assessments that are listed here. You'll notice that some of them listed, like under cognition, some of those require individual one-to-one assessments done by licensed psychologists. So some of these, as a public school district, are cost prohibitive to be able to administer one-to-one universally to all students. And so we've opted and have for years used the COGAT. You'll notice that I included it under other because, oh, I'm sorry, not in this one, because they did put the COGAT 8 on here. So COGAT 8 is the newest form that is provided. And we use that across the board. So from 2nd grade on, as we're talking about highly capable services, we use the COGAT. As far as academic achievement, we could use things like state assessments. We have opted to use the Iowa assessments. This is a little bit dated because it's no longer called ITBS. It is now Iowa assessments, but we use the Iowa K-12. So after a student in K2 meets the screener criteria, they take the Iowa, and then all students in 2 through 11 who are testing take the Iowa as well. Additionally, under creativity, this was something that we added a few years ago. This was something that we talked about. We were identifying lots of students who were high academic achievers, but there wasn't an element that we were assessing for creativity and creative thinking. And so we researched several different assessments. The one that we landed on happened to be the one that the state identifies. So we use the Torrance in grades. Well, they take it in 2nd grade, but it's for identification in 3rd through 12th. As far as research-based rating scales, we only use that for primary enrichment. If you think about, like right now, we had 660 students testing for highly capable this month. And so asking teachers to take each of those rating scales takes at least 30 minutes to really go through, because you have to go through the process of the training of understanding what it is you're assessing. Then you go through and you individually score every student on those 80 to 90 different characteristics and traits. And so doing that for 660 students would also be time prohibitive and cost prohibitive. And so that's why we only do it at the primary grade levels. And then for informal measures, when all the data comes in, that data then is given to our multidisciplinary committee. They review the data. As I shared last year, I believe, one of the things that the committee then does, as we're looking towards equity and students with different profiles and backgrounds, is we pull specifically students whose home language is something other than English. And when a student, we do an extra pass for any student whose home language is identified as something other than English, to ensure that we don't have bias in the data specific to home language. And we dig into other assessments. We work with teachers and pull information to really try to get a full idea of a student's needs and abilities, and we don't use cut scores. So that's another kind of misnomer. When we are looking at whether or not a student qualifies, we use a matrix, and it's a detailed matrix that pulls both academic achievement, cognitive aptitude. It now includes the Torrance and the creative thinking and science. So that was the other addition that we added with part of the academic piece. The committee then convenes, they review all of the information, the scores, the different profiles, and they make initial determinations. Information goes out to families, and then there is an appeal process for those who don't reach their scores on the matrix to qualify. If you go to, keep going, Andrew. So if you recall, right here under the primary structures. So prior to this year, we had 3 of the 4 primary structures, and we have added the 4th primary structure, which is the inclusion of offering services within a general education setting for students. This year it's in grade 3, and then it will roll up. So we have opportunities and services provided in Gen Ed. We have them in unique high cap classrooms. We have acceleration services. That's really what you see at somewhat in middle school and then in high school. And then we have non-traditional services. And the best example of that is DI. And the number of students we have who participate in Destination Imagination, which isn't part of the school day, but it's an extracurricular activity that's supported by the district. The next section really talks about ways like instructional strategies and curricular modifications that are done to support high cap learning and high cap services. And so we checked those things that we do on a very regular basis to provide those services. That's not to say that a student couldn't participate in an independent project or complete an independent study. It doesn't mean that's not happening. It just means we can't guarantee that that is being offered in every case. That would be more of an individual differentiated opportunity for students. So as you look through what we offer in the different service areas, right? Those 4 modalities, whether it's Gen Ed classroom, high cap classroom, DI, and acceleration. Those are the strategies and modifications that our staff make to provide those services. They're the same under each of the different categories. And then the last bit is, how do we monitor and measure? Are we doing things? You'll notice we list out what the options are. So we have district policy, we have a budget and how we spend that budget. We agree that we comply, that we've got procedures. So we check those. You noted, or I know that we have added code 32 services for the variety of services at grade levels for grades 3, and then we're rolling it up each year. As far as evaluation, one of the things that we heard last year and even several years ago, we were talking about adding the code 32 services, those Gen Ed services within a classroom, was how are we going to know whether or not it's effective? And so this February will begin the process now that students and families have been there in high school. It's not as significant. It's really in the elementary levels, but it's looking at how are things going for those students who are receiving code 32 services? How is it going for students? How is it going for teachers? How is it going for families? And so we will be putting out a survey, gathering information and feedback about how it's going and how we can improve. As you heard the elementary instructional coaches talking tonight, one of the things they did that they didn't spend a lot of time on was this creation of a third grade handbook. Really, as Chris talked about, being able to enrich and extend in every single classroom. It didn't have to occur only in code 33 classrooms. And so that's one of the things that we've done, but we want to check in and see how has that resource and service and partnership that she's had with teachers been able to support students, and what more might be needed if we're not there yet. So
I meant to ask her about that, because on the inclusionary practices group that I've been participating in, she's talked a lot about it. It's really amazing. So with the third grade, what she's done all year is look at the math standards and then actually create assignments for, you know, at both ends. So the extended, the kids that need the extension. So teachers, when they feel like there's a need for a student, they just, it's already there. They can go in and get that information or that teaching so that, and it's accessible to everybody. So, sorry,
Yeah.
it's just,
that's great.
And embedded in the curriculum, they have access to some of that too, so they've got 2 places to go for that.
Additionally, one of the things that now that we have iReady and it's onboarded and we've got what do you call them, benchmark assessments or the
Diagnostic.
diagnostic assessments. Nova and I just the other day were looking at, we pulled the data, we pulled COGAT scores in quantitative reasoning, we pulled their Iowa math scores, we pulled their diagnostic scores, along with the details, the strand data as to within those, which of the 4 math practices, where they were scoring out on grade level, were they on grade level, were they ahead, were they grade levels ahead? And then we looked at high cap identification on which of those students, did we miss somebody? Is there somebody that we overlooked? Is there something that data that's out there that is giving us information about other kids? Every single kid who's currently qualified for receiving high cap services is doing well. And they're either at grade level or near the end of grade level. I think 11 of them had 2 or more areas where they were slightly above grade level. 11 of them had 2 or more areas in which they were mid-range or below grade level in those 4 areas on the iReady diagnostic. And there were 3 students who emerged as performing really well on the iReady, who didn't qualify for high cap services, but now I'm going to go back and do a deeper dive and figure out, is it because these students are new to us? They came after testing had occurred and they didn't test in the fall. Is it because they came, so new students, is it that they just suddenly they've blossomed and they're doing really well now and they didn't? Perhaps they're a student who's going to want to retest and pursue high cap going forward. So there's only 3 of the entire, we were looking at 3rd graders of the entire 3rd grade class. There were 3 that looked like outliers that I want to go back to, but for the most part, the data aligned and really supported the process that's in place and making sure that we're identifying our district's most highly capable students.
And I think the other thing that as we look at the growth data coming back from iReady and kind of going in to look at those things, one of the things I'm excited about, and Chris and I started looking at it on Tuesday, I think. Not all classes are done just yet, but as we look at that growth data, we can see if they've made annual typical growth or stretch growth, as they call it, in iReady. And stretch growth is that they would go above and beyond what is expected of a student who scores in that ranking. So looking at that data, even looking at those high cap students, we're seeing it at minimum a year's worth of growth trajectory anticipated in our end of year. So we can target down to the student in terms of whether or not they're having a year's worth of growth in their current model as they're engaging in classes.
Can I just ask a question going back to like where you have the grid and you've shown what grades the different assessments are for, like the TTCT, like I just saw as like 3rd grade through 12th grade, but we wouldn't be using it with older kids, right? Like there's no reason why we would.
So we're using that as to gather some longitudinal data and to track over time how students are doing. And so that also, I think this was last year as well. I talked about sharing with teachers more information. So just because a student doesn't qualify for services based on their matrix scores, doesn't mean that they don't have unique characteristics, right? So I think last year, one of the things I shared is, we had a couple of students who didn't qualify for any services, but they were scoring like 97th, 98th, 99th percentile on the Torrance. So creatively, they're thinking differently. And so we want that in the hands of teachers, regardless of grade level, right? We're not providing direct support, but I think that's a great data point for a teacher to say, okay, I'm having trouble reaching this student. I'm looking at their academic profile. Academically, looks like, you know, they've remained similar performance level for several years. How do I tap into it? Oh, wait, but this student is off the charts in their abilities with their creative thinking. How might I leverage that to tap into helping them achieve more growth?
And so a parent could nominate their ninth grader, even though high cap qualification services are different in high school. So anyone could nominate their child going up really through 11th grade to go into 12th grade.
Okay, great, thank you. As the report ends, you know, it's making sure, like, do we use multiple data points to identify students? Do we use national norms? Like, we have to affirm that. And then one of the last things we need to do is identify the number of students served in our program. Andrews, if you could open the other attachment, because it shows just to see over time. So these are, I excluded participation in code 35 services, right, which is DI. Many of those students are duplicates of students already receiving services. Some are not though, but because these are the students that we identify. DI is something that is self-select, so a student can choose to participate. This is for students in grades 3 through 12. It's unduplicated high cap enrollments by grade level for this current school year. And so if you look total for our overall, this was as of October 2022, the percent enrolled as a district is 17%.
And this includes, I'm sorry, I'm looking at some other numbers. This includes students who participate in Destination Imagination.
It does not, no. So this is exclusive of code 35. So these are students who are identified through the identification process to receive services, whereas DI is self-select.
And how many appeals do we get that end up getting rejected?
I do not have that number off the top of my head.
And how many appeals do we have that get put in?
Like the people appeal.
Appeal, and then they.
I mean, I would say on average 60 or so. If I had to guesstimate
So, yeah, I see.
on a test.
That's about 10%. Yeah, a little bit less than 10%, yeah.
Code 33 again.
So code 33 is unique classroom. And code 32 is what we've added this year, where you don't have to qualify holistically to receive services if you are advanced in math and that's your area that you need additional support in to move beyond. That can be served in the general ed classroom. Same goes with reading and literacy. So you could do one or the other and still receive.
So when you say unique classroom, 34 is like.
34 is like AP, honors,
Okay,
lit, honors geo.
okay.
That kind of thing. So if you look, just at our cohorts over time, I think there was the perception that, like we were cutting numbers and we were not identifying students. And if you look, you know, as a district, we're at 17%. When we did the study in 2018, the feedback we got was at 16%, we were over-identifying. We didn't go in with the outcome or the desired outcome of reducing that number or setting a bar of like, well, we're only going to qualify 12% or 5% because that's what we're funded at. We really
Well,
didn't.
the 5% is for testing, not for courses, right?
No,
I think
5%.
5% is what we're funded at.
It's the funding, but the funding goes for the testing, not for
No,
the key percentage. It's. I can send you.
It helps supports that, but it can go further than.
We'll continue the conversation about 5%.
So
Well,
if
I
I look at the
think-
grants, right here, it says the highly capable funding formula is based on 5% of each LEA's population. This is a funding formula and does not mean a certain percentage of students must be identified. That's what I'm saying. I'm just saying, when we went into it in 2018, we didn't go in to say, all right, the report says we're over identifying at 16%. We want it to be 12%. We want it to be 5%. We didn't give a number. we said, we need to make sure that we are identifying our most highly capable students and what other measures might we need to take a look at to make sure that we're doing that. That's where we added the addition of the torrents. And that's where we added science as an area as well that we assess, because when students get to middle school, that is an area of code 33 service delivery.
And I think the 5% is a small number because highly capable education is still part of basic ed.
Yeah.
It's not intended to fund the whole thing.
No.
Well, it's because like really the cost of providing more accelerated courses is just the testing for it, which is pretty minimal.
No, there's extra training. and-
There's staffing,
There's
there's training, there's
curriculum.
Some of the classroom size, I mean, we could do an analysis, but some of the classroom sizes like at Lake Ridge are higher than the average student body population and that grade, I think, in some of these combined courses. So, I mean, it would be less expensive on a per student basis for like certain, looking at the code 33 in the elementary, like those class sizes are larger. So it's actually less expensive to teach those students.
Yeah, I mean, that's not part of anything that I'm presenting. I'm just trying
Well,
to show.
5% is just like, it really has nothing to do with anything.
Oh, it'd be great to have. In a district like ours that tends to have more, it'd be great to have more funding, just like we could use more special ed funding. We don't get it.
But the funding is for just the screening, it's
But
not
an
really
example
for
of an
anything
added
else that's
cost
substantive.
An added cost that's associated with highly capable education is in third grade, Heather McClyman is teaching iReady. She's been tasked with using both third and fourth grade to fill gaps for students in their learning, because what we know about kids is that they're not gonna come in and just automatically be able to transition to fourth grade math without some of that skill building that's gonna get them to those standards. So she has to do both of those things. What that means is I had to purchase both third and fourth grade for her. So that's an added cost that's not just associated with testing, is what I'm saying.
Additionally, we provided high cap curriculum to all third grade teachers, right? So instead of saying that curriculum is only available in certain classrooms, those things that were supplemental that were provided exclusively to code 33 classrooms previously, we purchased for all third grade classrooms, so that any classroom that has a student receiving code 32 services, and to be honest, any student who needs it has access, the teacher has access to those materials. So this slide is just to show, although we were told in 2018 that we were potentially over-identifying students, after.
And who said this, was it the?
We did
EEC?
Center for Educational Effectiveness.
Okay, the
Did our review.
EEC, the same one that did the report on ICAP from 2018.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. So we didn't go in with a preconceived notion as to a target number. We really want to make sure we're identifying students who need services. And so, as you can see, this year we're at 21%. So we've increased in percentage. And as a district, we're a percentage above where we were at that point. That's not to say that I think we are over identifying. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying these are the numbers. I think a benefit to the shifts that we made are that students who are not able to qualify in both reading and math, they're not excluded from receiving services, that a student is able to receive those services.
I think they're also
in
just
their
highlighted, right? So like the recognition that we're using that data to impact student learning, I think is what's important, right? So whether they have a label or not is not what's important, but rather that the teacher knows, okay, these students might be ready for a greater deal of challenge. So I'm going to plan accordingly and instruct them as such.
I don't know if there, I'd be curious to know, for our, especially high school, but middle school too, because, well, I don't know how many options they have for honors in middle school.
They don't, the way that they do high cap is similar-ish. It's like a
Right.
mixture of middle and high.
Yeah, they're assigned to specific.
So
levels.
math in the middle school goes to code 34, right?
Right.
So that's acceleration.
Yeah.
High cap services for code 33 students in the middle school is they take English, language, arts, and science.
Right.
Those are their homogeneous classes.
So my question though is, for high school, it's self-selecting, so anyone can take an AP class or an honors class. Obviously, if they have the prerequisites. So how many of these kids are actually taking advantage of that? because I know that obviously the numbers who are
Yeah.
taking them are a lot higher than this. But of the actual identified high cap, is that a statistic that
We could run it. What happens in what part of the service model at the high school level is students who are identified. When they go to register, there is a real intentionality by the counselor. They see the students who are flagged as high cap and they look at their course registration and they'll say, hey, you've been in high cap for 2 years, 5 years, but you haven't enrolled in any advanced coursework. You know, is there something that has changed? And it might be that the student is, you know, they're at PNB all day and they, you know, that's where their passion is right now. It might be that they say, oh, I didn't realize that. I thought I clicked that button in Skyward. Yes, I really have a proclivity towards math and sciences. I want to be doubling up in science this year. And the counselor then is working directly with the student to ensure that they've selected courses that will meet the rigor that they have had along the way.
Great, okay. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm glad that we use the state definition for highly capable. Which is students who perform or show potential for performing at significantly advanced academic levels when compared with others of their age, experience, or environments. Outstanding abilities are seen within students' general intellectual aptitudes, specific academic abilities, and our creative productivities within a specific domain. These students are present not only in the general populace, but are present within all protected classes. No mention of, of giftedness. I mean, in terms of like definitionally, I mean, that's the definition. And I guess, there's two things, right, to highly capable. One is appropriate screening. Part of that, which was updated in 2019, which sounds like after we last updated our screening, is that local norms can be no more restrictive than national norms. When you have, I've seen in previous board meetings that 1/4 of our second graders are at the 97th percentile in reading and math. Like not necessarily 1/4 in both those domains, but in one of those. And I think when you have a district like ours, there's a question because it's about, at the end of the day, providing an appropriate education to every student that would benefit, whether that's 1%, 5%, or 50%. In the same way, when it comes to students in other places of the spectrum, it's not a set number. It's not you're any most one of these or that. It's who would benefit from a different pathway, from different curriculum. So that's the screening question. And I have not seen evidence from my perspective that we've thought meaningfully of what local norms being no more restrictive than national norms means. And what students do show the capability of performing at significantly advanced academic levels. So that's the first, is the screening question. Then the
Just because we might need to start there and then hold this second one. So is the question, how are we contemplating local norms versus national norms when we're looking at individual students and whether or not they benefit from highly capable services?
Well, I recognize we look at national norms of the 97th percentile, which, I mean, if you look at STANINE and standard deviations, usually the top 6% is the cutoff, is the statistically significant standard of deviation. So like, yeah, so like one, and then two, like you can say 97th percentile, but once you layer on, well, 97th percentile, but you gotta average that across multiple tests. There's a question of, well, are we discriminating or harming those students who are twice exceptional, who like maybe do really well in one test, but like just don't have the ability, to consistently do well across multiple tests? I mean, to use an analogy, when you look at like the top decathletes, right? They're not nearly as good in any specific sport as like those that are in the best of their sports. Because once you layer on additional hurdles, and they are alternative qualifying mechanisms, but cumulative, and particularly the Torrance test for creativity, like it's not an additive, like you either do really, really well in this and this, or this, but it's, when running through the matrix, if you do very poorly on the Torrance test, which seems to have no correlation that I've seen to the other test, you know, what used to be the ITSB and is now the Iowa test or the COGAT. I mean, it raises flags, and it's really the only test, as far as I'm aware, that tries to quantify creativity. I mean, I don't know how Duchamp would have done with his ready-made toilet for creativity. But I mean, that's perhaps like a different discussion. But yes, like,
So how do we use those tests?
how do
they
we use the
factor
test?
in?
Again, like, with the end goal of, we're testing for what students would benefit, not a set number, not a set percentage, and not making it our most, you know, accelerated students, because if we start saying our, then that looks like our norms are more restrictive than national norms. And that's pretty clearly not permissible under like the Washington Administrative Code, that again was updated in 2019. And I mean, I don't think our district is taking that seriously. I don't think many districts frankly have. I mean, perhaps Lake Washington is an exception, which seems to be greatly expanding their offerings. And then two, which I think is really like needed, because there's a lot of focus, which is important. It's screening at the elementary school level. But it's then what's the substance and how does that track from when students, you know, enter our school district to when they leave? And my concern is that we have 25% taking a domain like math, which is easier to track. I mean, just because English and language is more difficult to sort of, you know, to quantify. We have 1/4 that are in the top 3% nationally in second grade for aptitude by COGAT. Yet in our 5th grade, highly capable classroom, the standard textbook is 1 grade level above standard. I mean, I would think that would be what our standard would be in courses. And then, you know, sort of tying it to an earlier conversation, we look at where's our accelerated math offerings by the end of the high school, and it's like, well, we don't really have them, but you can go to third parties like that provide. So the question is, what's the substance, you know, for these pathways? And then also, like, you know, where's the evidence that the code 32 and the push-in is actually accomplishing what it purports to do? Because anecdotally, from what I've heard and from what I've seen when this was rolled out at the elementary level for 1st and 2nd grade, is not much.
So why don't we start with, maybe we work backward. Maybe we start with there, because maybe what I had heard around how are we measuring how students are doing. I don't know if you were getting at that when you were talking about our iReady and how our kids are performing, and then checking in with surveys with parents. Granted, this is our 1st year, so we don't know the exact effectiveness, but let's just reiterate what we are doing on that.
I want to jump in about sort of the progress of kids. So when we think about Heather's class, for example, right? So if the assumption that we have is that those students are ready for 4th grade standards in September, my belief would be that our typical growth, annual growth, would have already been reached for all of those children, which is not true. Half of them have reached their typical growth. And then when we look at a stretch growth, even fewer of that half. So when we're looking at other data points, which not just to look at that Iowa as the only assessment.
Quickly about growth though, like, right? If you have an athlete that's performing at a level and they're never taught more demanding skills, like you can have a very like capable athlete that you see 0 growth in. Like, it doesn't mean they're not capable.
I'm not,
But-
I'm not sure you're quite hearing
Hold on.
exactly where it's going.
So
Okay,
part of what the difference, right? So we've got the nationally normed assessment of the Iowa, right? So if we're sticking with math, we have that's a nationally normed assessment. But when we talk about iReady data and where we're triangulating data to look to see how a student is performing on the Iowa align with iReady is actually looking at standards. So it's now looking at 3rd and 4th grade standards. If we're using Heather McClymon's class as an example, she's working on 3rd and 4th grade standards. When the students take that diagnostic, we're receiving information that is way more than just the nationally normed test of the Iowa, right? That's how they're doing against their peers, not how they're doing against standards. And so we have to make sure, like, that's where we're bringing in this other data point to say, is this aligning? Are we seeing this? Because what you'll see, if you were to see the iReady diagnostic data, is that students who qualified only
only a few of them are advanced in 3 areas. I think there's only one who in our district identified for math services this year. It has 3. No single student is advanced in a grade level in all 4 domains of standards. And so I think sometimes we get caught up in like, we are only using this assessment, just like, you know, it's 97th percentile. We're looking at a variety of things. That's part of the work of our multidisciplinary committee is we don't have a cut score with the exception of the screener, which we then have other means to look through. For PES, when we're talking about high cap and homogeneous classroom grouping versus services within a gen ed classroom, we're really looking at a variety of different things. And there isn't, just because a student doesn't score in the 97th percentile or something, students can score in the 92nd percentile and still qualify based on their cognitive aptitude. And then we're looking at that in conjunction now with the iReady data, which is standards based, not based on how their peers are performing nationally. And so I want to make sure we're understanding it's not just that they're ready because they're against their peers, they're ready. They also have to be ready based on the content of the standards established.
So you're saying that students that do well compared to their peers nationally still may not be that exceptional in substantive knowledge for whatever reason. I mean, it could be like, they just can't learn that much, like, right? Or like, it could also be that not enough is being taught in the classrooms.
Or they haven't been exposed to it.
Yeah, exactly.
It has not been explicitly taught, right? So
Yeah.
if you're taking a normed assessment, you're performing at a higher rate than peers nationally. That still doesn't mean that you've been exposed to the standards. It means you might have a greater aptitude and a proclivity to be able to then move at that quicker standard, which is then why we identify those services and provide those within the classroom.
Well, but I mean, I guess my question is, I mean, it seems actually even deeper is if you have large percentage of students with high aptitude, but actually not that much like substantive knowledge because they haven't been taught it, then to me, that asks the question of like, well, why aren't they learning more and being exposed to greater in the classroom than they are? I mean, or at least it seemed to beg that question rather than saying, well, like.
And I think that is also fundamental to all the work the elementary team did last year with the new adoption. Because I think that's, I mean, in K2, we'll start iReady next year, but I think that was part of the shortcomings of Math Expressions is it did not have a lot of flexibility in terms of what students could do. And I you know, kind of going back to that whole adoption process is recognizing that exact phenomena that can happen. We all know in our literacy classrooms, it's a lot easier potentially to, you know, scale up, scale down. Mathematics, if you're not careful, can get very siloed. And I think that's what we're trying to do differently. And what I'm interested in as we do our screening, not for high cap, but in our general screening here with the measures coming up, or how are those students doing who we have identified? And then how are students doing who we haven't identified? And I think you're starting to point that out where we're catching some students who maybe we didn't identify. And I think that's back to your point, Director Glotz, which is, you know, are they our most highly capable or not or whatnot? Maybe that doesn't matter at the end of the day as much as who can benefit from even more. And if we've got 3 kids who we didn't code correctly, label or not, how do we help them? And I think that's got to be part of the thinking.
But I want to be clear, like it was 3 kids, right? Like out of the entire grade, it's not like we had hundreds of students and oh my gosh, this is pointing out something, a massive flaw in our system. What it's doing is confirming our process is working to identify students who benefit from this service and who need it. And look, there is this small group. How might we work to capture them in this next round, right? As we just finished testing second graders universally this month. How might we make sure that we have an N of 0 that next year at this time, we're not saying, oh, how do we not get those 3?
I feel like, just since we've been looking at the fundamentals tonight, like I feel like what you're describing and the use of the data, even in kids that don't qualify for like the specific programs, it gets to that like fundamental one, create a personalized learning environment where differentiated instruction, student-centered education and varied learning opportunities, blah, blah, blah. You know, it's about being responsive. It's about figuring out like, we know this about this kid now, like, how can we serve them better?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and as Lisa pointed out tonight, like the ability within, and I'm sticking just to math because that seems to be the topic of the night. But we can see strand data, we can see gaps and areas specifically where they're excelling, where they need enrichment or depth, or areas that they need some backfill and some additional support. And I think that's something, that's data that we haven't had before, right? We've heard, like, I want my student to accelerate, right? But sometimes acceleration, if you're looking at the 4 different domains that they're assessing within the iReady diagnostic, there might be 2 areas in which a student really is excelling. And great, let's find ways to challenge and push and enrich and deepen that understanding. But there might be an area or 2 that they actually still need some grade level work. And let's make sure they're getting that too, so that as their skills continue to build, there are no gaping holes that we're able to fill as we go.
Yeah, and I think I'll just add to, like, you know, of the 4 domains that are measured in really all of these assessments, just differently. They have numbers and operations, algebraic thinking, data placement, and geometry placement. And when we think about those categories, what we noticed, Chris and I, when we were originally looking at the winter data, is that for some of the students, even if they scored really highly on the Iowa, would score lower in number and operations. Well, that's something we have to rectify before we can do any sort of acceleration, because that's going to be a significant gap for them as they increase in grade level. So we want to make sure that we cover those skills so that they can be successful. So I say that just to say that I think that the Iowa tells us one piece of the story, but we didn't before have the criterion referenced piece to look at as a part of that and to make really true instructional decisions. And Iowa isn't going to give us instructional decision-making process. The iReady will help support that in getting us there. So as I walk through classrooms and as our iReady partners walk through classrooms, the excitement that they have around that and the excitement we see kids having. Megan Isaacson was talking to kids when we were at their school just for our recent visits, and the excitement with which kids were talking about math was more than I had ever seen before. So it was just really encouraging to see that. And I think in the long term, we're going to be able to better support kids, but I think that in the short term, obviously, we're still working through seeing this data and its alignment because it is a new tool. So we've had 2 diagnostic periods as a reminder. That's not a lot of time to make full-fledged decisions on, but I think we're aligning it to really see where are the gaps in the Iowa in terms of instruction.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for taking on the questions. Any other discussion from the board?
Yeah, just like one brief comment. So I think maybe in the last year, we were looking at math pathways. And it had a diagram for this compacted math course and being offered to 7th graders. And one of the questions from community members, myself as well, was, well, should this be offered to the most accelerated 6th graders who have demonstrated the greatest aptitude for math? And the response to that meeting was, well, those students are already on track for taking calculus by senior year. The requirements under state law, as well as our mission, as well as I just think philosophically, should be meeting students where they are at and not any predetermined pathway. And for me, maybe that was a misstatement, but I'm looping back to a conversation we just had earlier, and sort of a lack of pathways for acceleration on math seemed demonstrative, or at least, you know, reflective of this idea that, no, like there's a ceiling implicitly perhaps of calculus by
It's
senior
changed.
year.
Like, I just want to let you know.
I'm glad it's changed, but like that mindset, I can't square with what it is to provide an appropriate education.
It was
for
a,
those
it was a
students.
somebody misspoke, it was a misspeak. In that presentation, if you look at the Math Pathways website now, you'll see that Erin Miller, the principal of the high school, said, hey, I think we really, what did I say, high school? Sorry. He put a new video, we put a new video link on there that clarifies that specifically for students who are identified. They're currently enrolled, like all students who are enrolled in Code 33 classrooms in 5th grade, for high cap services are automatically matriculating into the compacted 2-3 class as sixth graders. So if that was, if it was misrepresented last year, or it wasn't covered in depth because,
I mean, it was on the diagram.
great, I mean, I'm sorry it was
Okay.
there, but I'm saying it has since been rectified, and it's now the pathway, that was the intention.
I
Okay,
have one
fair.
closing comment,
Yes.
just, I asked for this last year and I'm gonna keep asking for as long as I'm on the board. And I think these programs need names that human people can remember, because even in this discussion here, we've had to be like, wait, which is the coach 32? Which is the coach 33? Like, you just need a name, and I know it's kind of charged, like what name you would put it on, but whether it's like in classroom versus special classroom versus, you know, enrichment in high school or whatever, just at some point, I would love to get names for these programs. And I know, I get that the code name is set by the state, but it could be like code 32, and in parentheses, you know, like the green trees or whatever.
Just qualify for us till we get actually.
No, I do.
Acclimated to the-
It's just a river or
No,
whatever.
Okay, let's,
Can I just want to thank you for this information. I think that, I'm thrilled that, with where the committee came out in terms of adding the creativity. I would love to, if there's some way to kind of measure whether or not teachers are actually seeing that, and then using it and allowing those kids, whether it's an artistic ability or whatever it is, or they think about things differently, and I don't know, I'm not one of those kids, but, if the teachers are since they're obviously they're not gonna get pulled out for that, but if they're using that in their classroom and assisting those kids in reaching their highest potential.
so remind me again, how much money are we getting from this?
136,000, it's actually 135,900 something.
Okay, thank you. So, at this moment, I'll take a motion for approval of the ICAP program plan I-Grant application.
I move that we approve the application for the I-Grant.
But it's my
That's
earlier.
second.
No,
Second.
the board approval is for the plan, not for the grant, according to WAC. So like, I mean, we can recharacterize it, but like, the legal requirement is whether you approve the plan, not the grant.
Okay.
Okay.
I second that.
so noted. Seconded. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Against?
Name.
Okay, that's approved 4-1. So math was the MacGuffin of this episode. Yeah, thank you all. Thank you for your time on this. Yeah, Matt, I think it is no coincidence. It keeps coming out of it. STEM, it is no coincidence. So we definitely need to look at something along these lines, but thank you for this. Appreciate all the work you've done, and I appreciate, I think as Brett said, it's nice to be able to have tough conversations in the boardroom, nothing personal intended. All about doing the best for our kids and our students, especially as we have very high expectations these days, and our kids are on a very different world. And I know you're caring about 360 degrees of them, even though we're talking about, less than an eighth of a degree right now, but we appreciate it. So thank you very much. And keeping the episode rolling.
Really more math.
This is
Encompasses a whole lot more than that.
yes,
So
but
I mean, I think there's huge deep dives in the high school math curriculum this year. So I think we just need to be patient, I agree that there's significant issues, but they're doing the work. Let's hear what our experts have decided.
let's move on to, thank you, Deborah. Sorry, let's move on to item 2E, budgeting and financial planning.
Let's do 2A, and then we'll put the budget stuff all
Oh,
together.
you're not
as
do
well.
2A?
No, that's the one we kept postponing.
Oh, okay, fair enough, sure, thank you. 2A. Communications going to the board, public policy.
So we kind of had a 3-part approach to this. One was to talk to you conceptually around what a change in the public records policy would entail. tonight then is a first reading of really what the language would look like. Then give community time if you are still wanting to move forward to provide any input, and then it would be part of your next board meeting if you were to adopt anything from there. So I'll turn it over to Director Bowdersby.
Yes, so this is just bringing forth policy 4040 and its associated procedure, which is public records, which we discussed somewhat in depth, the changes last week in sort of our last board meeting, which is 2 weeks ago, in a table format that largely, if you look at the procedure markup, oh, it's very blurry.
Pulling it up right now.
No worries. Just is discussing the changes in fees to expand to include scanned documents. And the transfer documents via gigabytes, based on a gigabyte fee basis, et cetera. We also went through, as has been practice, and created hyperlinks to the various RCWs and what have you, and updated a reference to RCW 42.56.070. It said 9, it should have been an 8, we just caught an error there. And that's really all that was done, so it's just analogous to what was shared last week, but in a more lengthy format. You will see there is a reference to $2, so we could, and then a reference that we could choose to waive it for things like, there's a flat fee alternative there. At the bottom, which I think was brought up by a director during our conversation, and that we could waive fees for things like PPAs asking for direction information, et cetera. So there's a nominal fee which we could choose to just waive as a board.
And these are for public records, not student records.
Right, and there is a change to the policy itself to clarify that the records reference for student information are not regularly maintained as part of the student's educational records, are not considered group student records, instead are public records, to which this policy applies. So it just clarifies that things that are regularly maintained in student records, that falls into FERPA. So that's not anything that anyone would have to pay a fee for. So if you want to say, ask for your kids'